Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy today's episode.
Shiro smiled, seeing most of the requirements already fulfilled. Unfortunately, she could only sigh at the fact that she needed Jade Ice. Jade Ice was a drop that would be normally dropped from a level 50 Ice-type monster. While she didn't have to manually excavate it, it would still take a while for her to obtain the item. As for the creation of skills, she could take her time to experiment with the Frozen Hell series of spells. She needed to create a few more spells anyways. Glancing back at the party, Shiro saw that most of them had recovered. Only Madison was still a little injured. However, just the fact that she took the brunt of the boss's attack and still lived was something to be thankful for. Alright, let's get out of the dungeon. Yeah, we can finally leave. Jonas sighed in relief. During the time that Shiro had been updating her status, Sylvia had managed to fully regenerate his arm. So what do you plan on doing after this? Shiro asked while they were walking out of the castle. I'm going to retire. Jonas replied truthfully. Wait, retire? Sylvia was surprised. If Jonas retires, he would lose his only source of income. Yeah, I'm going to try to settle down with a wife and have a few kids. Ha ha ha. He laughed. Are you planning to get a normal civilian job? Lyrica asked. I don't know. How about you try being a trainer? For a school. You can help younger people fight better so that they're able to have a bigger chance to survive in dungeons. The mortality rates in dungeons are pretty high after all. Shiro replied. Yeah, I suppose that'll work. Jonas nodded. But let's go to a public bathhouse first. We have been stuck in the dungeon for almost a week now, ha-ow. Madison laughed but flinched from her injuries. True. I look like a mess right now. Shiro replied. Her outfit was covered with dried blood and a few scraps of flesh while her hair was tangled up with blood as well. Not only that, she frowned at the stench. Smell like one as well. Shiro continued. Same for me. Lyrica agreed. Hey, shall we also get the kids and all that back at camp to come as well? Madison asked. Oh, that'll be fun. Want to join us, Sylvia? Erica? It'll be like a ladies' night out. Lyrica suggested. Sure. Erica agreed since she needed a moment to relax herself. Me too. Sylvia nodded as well. Great. We'll go back first to see if the kids want to join us. We'll send you a text when we're ready. With the plans laid out, they walked towards the gates. *KRR. Opening the gates, they were greeted with the sight of a group of people who were surrounding a corpse. Shiro immediately narrowed her eyes coldly since that meant Trace had tried to release information about her class instantly. Slowing down so that she was near Sylvia, Erica, and Jonas, Shiro showed them her phone. A word about what happened inside the final boss room, and that is what happens. I had an idea that Trace was going to tell people, but I never thought that he'd try to turn the entrance into a bloodbath so soon. The three of them shivered in shock as Shiro was able to kill him without leaving their side. Excuse me, are you this man's friends? A patrolman asked as he walked over. Yes, we were in the dungeon together when it mutated, and we managed to survive. What happened? Sylvia replied. Well, I'm sorry, but from our scans, it seemed like he had a heart attack the moment he exited the dungeon. I'm sorry for your loss, the man said with a shake of his head. Right? Sylvia muttered dumbly. Walking a little further away from the scene, Shiro walked in front of them before pausing and turning around. Well, I do trust that you won't spread the word. Right? Shiro asked with a soft smile. However, when paired with her current appearance, it only caused the three foreign party members to pale. Madison and Lyrica were okay with it since they knew what people were like. If Trace had told everyone around the dungeon that Shiro had a pair of guns that allowed her to easily kill a level 50 boss, they would have been bombarded the moment they left the dungeon. Thankfully, Shiro was prepared. Sylvia made a pained face as she took a deep breath. She couldn't believe that her friend tried to expose his lifesaver to strangers, which could have killed everyone. I won't spread the word. But are you sure he tried to expose us? Sylvia asked with a tremble in her voice. Yes. The device only reacts when certain keywords are spoken together. Since it had killed him the moment he left the dungeon, I'm guessing that he tried to shout out the fact that I had something to kill a level 50 boss easily. I see. Sylvia nodded. Jonas could only sigh and shake his head. He had told them to not do something dumb, but instead, one died and the other did something even dumber. Well, just text me when we're going to the baths. I might take a little longer, though, Sylvia said as she forced a small smile. Watching Sylvia and Erica walk away, Jonas sighed once more and walked towards Shiro. I'll talk to her a little. Since I lead raid parties quite a few times, I know how much harm a single person could do. I just want to thank you for protecting the rest of the party. This caused Shiro to raise an eyebrow. You want to thank me for killing your friend? No. I want to thank you for protecting the rest of us. The moment he tried to turn the other adventurers against us, he was no longer my friend. He was someone who tried to kill us whilst acting as the third party. Jonas shook his head bitterly. I wish it could have turned out differently. Shiro apologized. So do I, Jonas replied before walking away. Well, this dungeon had certainly been rather intense, Lyrica said as Shiro and Madison nodded. Yeah, 2 died, and the 3 of us have improved a lot, Madison replied. You think Sylvia still wants to join us even after the fact that you basically killed both of her friends? Madison asked as she turned towards Shiro. Honestly, I don't know. We'll most likely have to try to find a different healer, I suppose. Ah, such a shame. She was so talented as well, Lyrica lamented. Before I forget, Madison, I have a purple shield that had dropped from the previous dungeon I went to. It has a requirement of being level 40, but the skills are worthwhile. Once we finished out bath tonight, I'll go upgrade it so that you can equip it earlier. Shiro typed out whilst she pulled out the rock giant's protection that she had collected back in Giant's Heart. Oh my god, what are these skills? Madison cried out in shock seeing the effects. While the base stats were rather subpar, the skills that the shields provided were incredible. As for you, Lyrica, I'll go upgrade a pair of dual blades for you. Ah, so the growth-type weapon was tampered by you, Shiro. Lyrica smiled wearily. Well, I can't say the full truth right now, but just know that I'm very talented with technology. Shiro grinned. I had my suspicions, but to think it's actually true. So how many levels of growth are you able to upgrade the weapon with? Last time it was 10 levels if I remember correctly. Yes, it was. I should be able to increase the max level to 45 or something around that. Shiro replied after a short pause. With her MP reaching 370k, along with the fact that her nanotech engineering skill increased to tier 2 due to her MP, she should be able to make a better version of the nano growth infuser prototype. What about the lowest level? Since before, I needed to add more weapons and items to the weapon to evolve it, didn't I? The lowest level will probably be 30. I suppose that depending on what happens, you should be able to use the weapons all the way till level 50. Shiro replied. Naturally, you're not allowed to sell these weapons since too many growth-type weapons in the market would be suspicious. By having them linked back to us, it'll only create more problems. Shiro warned. Oh, we won't, don't worry. Madison replied since she wasn't going to ruin the friendship she had with Shiro for some momentary benefits. She knew that as long as you don't overstep your boundaries, Shiro was a good friend to keep in contact with. I'm not worried. I trust both of you. Shiro smiled since she did trust both of them. While it wasn't full unconditional trust, it was enough for her to be okay with letting them know of her secret. She wasn't sure if she could trust them fully since the last time it happened, the hero had killed her. But she was willing to give it a second go since she could tell that both Lyrica and Madison were sincere. Let's go get Kane and see if she wants to join you in the baths. You're quite attached to Kane, aren't you? Lyrica asked. Well, it feels like having a little sister if I had to describe it. It's fun. Shiro smiled. Do you think that in a few years, she'll join us in adventuring? Madison asked, curious about their little friend. It'll be interesting, that's for sure. Currently, her determination is strong. If she kept that up, there's no doubt that she'll be able to become a great adventurer. Shiro nodded. So, another rival? Lyrica thought as she furrowed her brows. She had seen Kane being overly attached to Shiro during their time in the tents. However, she had ignored it since she was just a kid. But if she was going to join their party in the future, she may need to add Kane to her radar of people to watch out for. Arriving at the campsite, their campmates were shocked at the state of their bodies. What happened to you girls? Ava cried out in shock, especially since all 3 of them were coated with dried up blood. especially Shiro. She looked as if she had walked through a corpse explosion, which wasn't too far from the truth. Well, we were stuck in a dungeon for almost a week inside since it mutated. Lyrica replied. Oh God, a mutated dungeon. Christy covered her mouth. She remembers her husband saying the survival rates of mutated dungeons were shockingly low. While people could break open the dungeon, not many were willing to go that far for people they don't know. So we were just wondering if you want to go to a bathhouse? Since we were stuck in there for quite a while, we are in need of a good bath. Lyrica smiled. Oh, that's a good idea. Hey girls, you want to go to a bathhouse tonight? Ava asked as she shouted into the tent. Kane was the first one to peek her head out, and her face brightened instantly when she saw Shiro. Shiro-ne, she called out and ran towards her. AP, Kane, not yet. We were just in a dungeon, so we're quite dirty right now. We're going to a bathhouse to clean ourselves, Lyrica said as she stopped Kane from hugging Shiro. Lyrica's right. You should wait till after the baths for a hug. Shiro smiled as Kane pouted. Fine, she replied after a short pause. Shiro pulled out her phone as she saw Jonas sending her a message. Jonas. Hi Shiro, Sylvia just needs a moment to calm herself. She won't be joining you tonight. I expected as much. Shiro thought to herself since it would be weirder if she did come. Shiro, all right. Replying to the message with a simple response, there wasn't much else she could say. Who was that? Lyrica asked. That was Jonas. Sylvia won't be joining us tonight. I thought as much. Lyrica nodded. In the end, it was just the 10 of them who were going to the bathhouse. When they arrived at the bathhouse, they were surprised at how busy it was. With the influx of New York refugees, not many were able to wash up, so public bathhouses were popular at this moment. In addition to this, most of the people going were all covered in beast blood since they were adventurers. Due to the fact that most of the people were covered in blood, the bathhouses required you to take a shower first to wash away the blood before enjoying the baths. Otherwise, the water would be dyed red from the sheer amount of blood. When they were getting changed, the three mothers were praising Madison for her body figure, causing her to be embarrassed. However, this only earned her a glare from Shiro since she was still annoyed that Madison's first class up had matured her body figure. The bath was rather refreshing as Shiro closed her eyes and enjoyed the bath. Lyrica also enjoyed the bath, but it was for an entirely different reason. 6. After the bath, Shiro had changed into a more casual outfit. The clothes she decided on was a white long-sleeved shirt that was decorated with small amounts of frills, a black skirt that reached her knees, white stockings, and a pair of boots. Making sure that her hair was completely free of dried blood, Shiro was surprised to see her hair back to their silk-like state. Could it be that my body stays the same as long as there are no outside interferences? She thought whilst running her hands through her hair. Shrugging her shoulders, Shiro was happy if that was the truth. It meant that she didn't need to worry about conditioning her hair. Walking towards Lyrica and Madison, Shiro informed them about her going to upgrade their weapons right now. That fast? Lyrica asked. Yeah, I might as well get it out of the way now since I got stuff to do tomorrow. Shiro smiled. All right, don't take too long to come back though, Madison said as she was still drying her hair. Shiro nodded before leaving the area. Een, who had lost her hood to sleep in, could only perch herself on top of Shiro's head. Once she made her way back to her lab, Shiro took out the purple shield and Lyrica's dual-ended blades that she had commissioned Helion to make. The first thing to do was for her to make a better nano-growth infuser. Sitting down on her chair, Shiro leaned back before flexing her fingers. Lightning and metal twined together before a device could be seen in her hands. After upgrading her nanotech engineering to Tier 2, along with the fact that her mana pool was huge right now, the process was quick and efficient. Nano Growth Infuser level 30 to 50, purple. Seeing the device in her hands, Shiro smiled and flexed her hands to create a second device. With the 2 Nano Growth Infusers in her hands, Shiro chuckled when she understood that the moment she put these into the auction, all hell would break loose. Especially if she was able to make ones of a higher level, which she could. I'll upgrade the sword first since it's only a green ranked weapon. Shiro muttered, since if she were to do the process manually, she should be able to upgrade it into a purple-grade weapon. *KRSSSS. The nano-growth infuser hissed when it made contact with the magic crystal. The transformation was much more violent than the previous upgrade, since this was the bona fide nano-growth infuser and not some prototype. Insert materials to enhance the weapon? Y/N. Pulling out a few of the purple-grade materials in her inventory, Shiro accepted the prompt. Materials discovered: 3x pseudo blood dragon essence, 2x blood crystals, 5x blood beast talon, blood crystallized heart. Watching the infuser devour the materials, Shiro smiled with anticipation. Once the process was finished, a beautiful dual-ended blade laid in front of her. The blades themselves were narrow, with the edges being similar to that of a row of teeth. The color of the blades were black with veins of red that pulsed through the blades. The nanotech wasn't visible since it worked on the interior structure of the blade, rather than the outside appearance. Nanotech Blood Dragon Slayer LVL 30/50ths, purple. Plus 150/350 attack. Plus 150/400 attack speed. Plus 50/150 ignore defense. Plus 50 out of 100 life steal. Plus 100/250 STR. Plus 100/250 AGI. Plus 10% suppression against enemies equal or lower level than you. Skill locked. Blood Rain. Blood Rain. Cause blood to rain down onto the battlefield. Each droplet siphons your enemy's HP into yours. Duration: 5-15 seconds. Can be ended earlier. Health siphoned: 1/5% health. Cost: 5k MP per second. Cooldown: 5 minutes. Upgrade requirements: 10x blue blade type weapons, LVL 35. 1x blood crystal. 20x D-ranked mana stones. Looking at the stats, Shiro was rather surprised at the fact that the weapon had gained the party wipe skill one of the Guardian twins had used. Maybe it's because I used the blood crystallized heart as one of the materials. Shiro thought, since the blood crystallized heart was one of the drops she harvested when they had killed the Guardian twins. As for the basic stats, they were rather impressive in Shiro's eyes. While it may lose out a little once it reached level 50, the skill made up for that loss. Naturally, she couldn't have the fact that it was a nanotech weapon revealed, so she made a skill chip with the skill, disguise, to hide a portion of the status. Now the weapon was just shown as Blood Dragon Slayer. With Lyrica's weapon upgraded, Shiro turned her attention to the already purple-grade shield. Since the shield had already come with 3 skills of its own, she needed to avoid adding more skills, since too many skills and the shield would break itself. The only thing I need to do for Madison's shield is to convert it into growth-type equipment and buff its basic stats. Shiro thought to herself, since the stats of the level 40 shield were rather disappointing if not for the skills that it came with. Injecting the infuser into the shield, Shiro only added a few items to reinforce the basic stats of the shield. Nanotech Blood Rock Giant's Protection, LVL 30/50 shield, purple. Plus 150/350 shield defense. Plus 100/300 def. Plus 100/300 vit. Plus 100/200 reduce knockback. Plus 10/20% damage reduction. Plus 50/150 negate critical strike. Plus 50/150 damage reflection. Skills: Rock Giant's Projection. Summon the projection of a rock giant that protects your entire team. Damage is reduced by 60%, limited by level. Loses effect against LVL 55+. Aggro is increased by 70%, limited by level. Loses effect against LVL 55+. Speed is reduced by 80%. Cost: 5,000 MP. Duration: 30 seconds. Cooldown: 2 minutes. Rock Giant's Presence. Increases one's aggro on the field exponentially. Aggro is increased by 70%, limited by level. Loses effect against LVL 55+. Cost: 2,000 MP. Duration: 1 minute. Cooldown: 3 minutes. Rock Giant Stomp. A ground-shaking stomp that stuns your enemies for a short moment. Cost: 2,000 MP+. Range: Increases with the amount of MP used. Maximum range, 15 meters. Duration of stun, 5 seconds. Cooldown, 1 minute. The skills of the shield had no changes, but the basic stats experienced a huge change. In addition to this, Shiro grinned when the requirements were wiped from the weapon, meaning Madison could equip this shield without any problems. Stretching her body slightly, Shiro pulled out her phone and checked the dates. The auction is being held tomorrow. I should probably go alone so that Lyrica and Madison can rest back at the tent, Shiro said as she stood up. Come on, little Ian. We're going back now, she called out. Asterisk chirp. Chirping in response, Ian landed on Shiro's head to make her territory known. Shiro only chuckled slightly at Yin's behavior before making her way back to the tent. I'm back, Shiro greeted as she entered the tent again. This time, Lyrica wasn't able to hold Kane back as she leapt into Shiro's embrace. Shirone, welcome back, Kane said, causing Yumi to chuckle slightly. She smiled warmly, seeing Shiro become something similar to an older sister to her daughter. Not only that, but Kane was rather attached to Shiro as well. Shiro patted Kane's head as she turned toward the slightly jealous Lyrica and Madison, who was only smiling at the situation. I finished upgrading your weapons. Pulling out the sword and shield, Shiro handed them over to their new owners. Oh wow, they both muttered, seeing the stats on the weapons. Understanding that they shouldn't keep the weapons out for too long, they stored it away in their inventories. Thank you, Shiro. Thank you. It's pretty late now. We should sleep since we're rather fatigued from fighting in the dungeon. True, I've barely been able to keep my eyes open. Madison yawned while stretching her body. Since they were all tired, they didn't talk much and went asleep. ####. The next morning, Shiro woke up a little later than usual, but was still earlier than the rest of the people in the tent. As always, she moved Kane back into her own sleeping bag before walking out of the tent. So today, I want to go to the auction to look at what they have. I also want to see if I can get Aram to change my outfit a little, since white is not the best color to be dressed in whilst going on a slaughter, Shiro thought, as her current outfit was what she had worn after going to the bathhouse. Feeding herself and eating some D-ranked mana stones, she couldn't help but frown at her stockpile. Due to the fact that she wasn't able to take a break whilst fighting, she didn't have the time to excavate the mana stones. Even within excavating the mana stones when she could, they had eaten more than what they had harvested in the dungeon. This caused her stockpile to be whittled down slowly. Seems like I should see if I can buy a bundle of D-ranked mana stones as well, Shiro sighed and made her way to the auction house. However, this time, her appearance had earned her more stares from the crowd. With nothing covering her face and hair, it was hard not to see her. There were also a few malicious stares originating from the slums area, which only caused Shiro to narrow her eyes coldly. Before she went to the auction house, she made a trip to the Adventurers Guild since it was in the same direction. Waiting in the queue, she had the occasional adventurer give her a second stare, since they only casually glanced at her before being shocked by her beauty. "Ah, it's you again, Naya. How can I help you today, Naya?" Susie asked. "Just the same as usual. Update my status, please." "Sure, Naya. Just give me a moment, Naya," she said whilst taking Shiro's card. "I'm surprised that you're already level 43, Naya. Normally, people would take a few months to years to get this level, Naya. What did you do?" Susie asked curiously whilst updating Shiro's status. "I was stuck in a mutated dungeon." Shiro shrugged. It wasn't much of a secret to keep since everyone knew about mutated dungeons. "Mutated dungeon, Naya? You mean the one that mutated yesterday, Bloodveil, Naya?" Susie asked with surprise. "Yeah, it became a level 50 dungeon." "Wow, you entered into the dungeon as a level 35 or something, right, Naya?" "Level 37. That's still a 13 level difference between you and the monsters, Naya. How did you even kill the boss?" "A shield of a level 50 boss isn't something that can be broken easily, you know, Naya," Susie asked. "Trade secret. Well, I suppose that makes sense, Naya. Here's your updated card and have a nice day, Naya," Susie said as she handed back Shiro her card. Name, Shiro. Estimated age, 13. Class, Ice Mage. LVL, 43. Mages Association membership, VIP, New York branch. Priority rank, 9, New York branch. Storing her card away, Shiro made her way to the auction house. It would be great if I can find some jade ice. At least I'll be able to class up quickly before my 5th star, she thought whilst entering the auction house. Sitting down at one of the terminals, she searched for jade ice. Only 2 are available, Shiro muttered with a frown. Well, I guess it's fine. Pressing purchase, she received a receipt and walked over to the counter to redeem her items. 2 jade ices, please. Thank you. Can I have your receipt, please, to confirm that you are indeed the buyer? The receptionist asked as Shiro did as they asked. Receiving the receipt, the receptionist walked away to retrieve the items. After waiting for around 3 minutes, they came back with her items. Thank you. Shiro left the queue while storing her items away. Since the auction finale items are 3 purple grade objects, the previous items should also be pretty decent as well. Shiro thought to herself. Due to the fact that this was going to be a huge auction, it started in the afternoon and was hosted at the biggest hall the auction house had. As there were still a few hours until the auction house started, Shiro decided to send Aram a text to ask about the outfits. Shiro, hey Aram, are you free to chat for a bit? Surprisingly, she didn't need to wait too long for Aram to reply. Aram, I have a few moments to spare right now. What do you need? Shiro, you see, I need your help with the monster cloth outfit you made for me. I want to see if I'm able to change the design a little and re-dye the outfit from white to black. Aram, that isn't too hard. I'm able to rent a tailoring station in this city, so I can work on the outfit. But why do you need to dye it? I think white looks pretty nice. Shiro, it's because I was stuck in a dungeon. The blood dried up and somewhat dyed the white robe with splotches of red. Aram, I see, that's why. Aram, okay, sure, I can work on it. Do you know where the Tailoring Association building is? I'll just wait for you there, and you can give me the outfit. I'll have a look at the state there as well. Shiro, what about the payment? I still owe you a few photo shoots, I think. Aram, well, I'll just keep it on your tab. I can't do much about the photo shoot since all of my stuff is back in my workshop, and we both know how New York is right now. Shiro, all right, I'll meet you up at the Tailors Association soon. Putting away her phone, Shiro glanced one more time at the clock. I should have enough time to see Aram and make it for the auction, she thought whilst walking towards the Tailors Association. Arriving at the Tailors Association, Shiro was slightly surprised that the building was rather lackluster. It was very simple in aesthetic design when compared to the other grandiose buildings beside it like the Blacksmiths Association or the Alchemists Association. Entering the building, the inside was very simple as it had little to no decorations. Just the bare minimum. Looking around slightly, she pulled out her phone to text Aram when she couldn't find her. Shiro, Aram, I'm here at the Tailors Association. Where are you? Waiting for a moment, Shiro got her reply. Aram, okay, I'll be there in just a moment. It turns out that a few unsavory fellows wanted a taste of me, in the most sexual context. Taught those bastards a lesson. Shiro raised an eyebrow at this. Seems like the slums are making more moves now, especially since a few of them were targeting me earlier today as well. Shiro thought as her eyes were cold. Looking around for a chair, Shiro saw that there were hardly any chairs in the main reception except for a few sofas. Sighing slightly, Shiro sat on one of the sofas. Since there were only a few sofas available, Shiro had to share the sofa. The person who was next to her widened his eyes when he saw a cute girl sit next to him. However, when he looked around, he saw that there were few seats available, so he realized that she didn't sit next to him because she wanted to. Crushing the slight hope that had built up, he took this moment to give her another glance. Her skin was a healthy pale rather than a sickly pale. Her lashes quivered slightly as she glanced at her phone. Swallowing his saliva, he found it rather difficult to shift his gaze away. However, the moment Shiro turned towards him, he shifted his head away in a panic. Shiro only shrugged slightly since she was used to it. The only thing that bothered her was his unusually long stare. After 5 minutes of waiting, Shiro smiled when she saw Aram walk through the door. "Ah, Shiro, here you are. Oh my, that outfit suits you rather well, huh?" Aram said with a smile. The current outfit Shiro had on was a combination of the different pieces of cosplay that she had given her. Yet when combined, they weren't too bad. Well, I needed something to wear while the main outfit is dirty. Shiro shrugged. Oh right, speaking of which, can you show me the state of the outfit? Aram asked. Pulling out the outfit, Aram was shocked at how much blood had been dried on the fabric. Holy hell, what did you even do? Did you decide to suddenly have a spa bath with the finest monster blood with your clothes on? Aram cried out whilst grabbing the outfit. So are you able to redesign and re-dye the outfit? Shiro asked. Yes, but we need to get the blood out first. Thankfully, the Tailoring Association has some blood remover in their rooms. Come, I'm going to rent a room first. Walking to the counter, Shiro waited by the side while Aram asked for a room. The process was over rather quickly as they were soon led into a room on the second floor. The room was filled with equipment while there were hardly any room to move around. Well, this is a little smaller than expected, but I can work with this, Aram said as she sat down and got to work. Straight away? Shiro asked. Well, you are going to the auction, are you not? If so, I should make a start on your outfit as soon as possible so that you have something to wear. I mean, it's either that or you can just choose to wear what you have currently. Aram shrugged. She had been rather bored recently since she didn't have access to her workshop. Due to the sheer amount of materials she had gathered, she needed to store them inside her workshop rather than her inventory. While she did carry the rarer materials, none of the basic materials were carried on her, so she couldn't make anything. However, when Shiro asked her to edit her current outfit, Aram jumped at the opportunity. So any requirements? Aram asked while she started to work on removing all of the blood stains. Well, I mostly want the same, but a few small adjustments. First of all, the robe is the main focus of the changes since it's rather plain as it is right now. I was wondering if you can make it more efficient whilst also being pretty. Sue, basically you want me to design one based on what I think would suit you? Aram raised an eyebrow. Pretty much. Shiro smiled. She would rather let the designer give her a design. Well, since I've got nothing else to do, this would be fun. Aram grinned since she enjoyed making outfits. Shiro nodded while looking for a spot so that she could sit down for a while. Since she was mostly just waiting for Aram to make the outfit, she pulled out her phone and browsed around. I should probably look for a dungeon that gives me jade ice for my star up. I've managed to buy 2 so far, I just need 3 more. She thought whilst looking at the level 45 dungeons. Most of the dungeons were either underwater hybrids or earth-based. There were hardly any that gave her jade ice. Since her search was unsuccessful, Shiro decided to try this thing called the forums. She had found it during her occasional look through the web and found out that most people would ask for stuff in the forums. Looking for jade ice. If you know where to obtain it or have some to be sold, please inform me. Creating a thread, Shiro wrote down a few small details and waited for someone to answer her question. Hopefully, I'll be able to complete this before I reach level 45. If I reach 45 and haven't done my star up, it would count as a fail and I would lose my chance of upgrading it to 5 stars. Shiro thought with a sigh. Alright, done. Aram suddenly said as Shiro looked up in surprise. Fast, right? The equipment here is better than the ones back in my workshop since the Tailors Association is able to power all of these equipment with their stash of C-rank mana stones. I may be able to afford them, but in regard to their fuel source, I wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Aram shrugged. The cost of everything would be too much for her to sustain long term. By my estimates, I should be able to do everything in 3 hours. That should be just enough time for you to make your way to the auction. Aram smiled. Thank you. Don't be like that. You're one of the few who still stayed after knowing what I do. Aram shrugged since most of the girls who had found out about her store and her job immediately stayed away from her. Why would I leave? It's not like your job determined your personality. Ever heard of priests and elementary kids? What would be a positive job became stained due to it. Good point. Aram smiled. Spinning her chair towards the next set of machinery, Aram looked over at Shiro. So I can design it however I like, right? She asked. Shiro nodded since she was rather interested at what Aram would design for her. Just try to make the main color black. Got it. ####. In the end, It took a little longer than 2 hours since Aram was in a state of creativity. She was able to work at a much faster pace than before. Here done. Why don't you change into it and tell me what you think? Aram asked. Taking the outfit, Shiro looked around for a small room where she could change her clothes. Since this is a room rented for tailors, naturally there'll be a changing room. Might not be huge, but it should work with your body size, Aram said whilst pointing at some curtains that were shielding the small changing room. Thanks. Walking inside the changing room, Shiro looked at the outfit and started to change into it. It was quite a fast process, and she was soon finished. Walking out of the changing rooms, Aram marveled at her own handiwork. Well, it certainly fits you better now that I look at it in real life. I had a small idea of how it would look, but seeing and thinking are two different things, Aram said as she nodded in satisfaction. Currently, Shiro wore a black sleeveless robe that had her face mask attached to the neck area. The robe reached the back of her knees as the black slowly blended into a pale blue. In addition to this, the robe also featured a few folds and frills that were dyed a sky blue that blended into an ice white. Unlike before, the robes were connected together in the center, which allowed the white undershirt to be seen through the gaps. Furthermore, she also wore a black skirt that reached her thighs along with a pair of white stockings. Well, this is slightly edgy if I had to say so myself. But I suppose the black outfit and my white hair does make a rather nice contrast. Plus, most of my nanotech are colored black to begin with. Thank you. Shiro typed out. You're welcome. I had removed the hood since I think that letting the white hair flow out would contrast your outfit a little better. If you don't like it, I can add the hood back in, Aram replied. No, this is fine. It was already enough trouble asking Aram to help her with redying and redesigning the outfit. Plus, she could already make herself a helmet should she want to hide her hair. You have around 40 minutes till the start of the auction. Perfect. Aram smiled since she was able to finish everything before the auction started. Not only that, she was able to keep her craftsmanship consistent while also increasing the speed of her creations. If she continues at this pace, she felt that she should be able to increase her tailoring rank at the Tailors Association along with getting a few more benefits. You should get going. Try to get a good spot to oversee the entire auction, Aram suggested. Shiro thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. If there were any need to rob him, borrow an item, she would be able to see who was the owner. Plus, now that she had her hand cannon creation again, she would be able to kill level 60s if she took them off guard. Snowmancer wasn't a triple S class for nothing after all. It had one of the best cross-level killing capabilities. After talking with Aram for a little while, Shiro left the room and walked towards the auction house once more. Feeling several gazes skim over and occasionally linger on her that originated from the slums, Shiro couldn't help but feel a little worried for her friends. Seems like the factions in the slums are about to make a move. They might be planning to start kidnapping some of the girls from New York, since we're literally next to where trade routes are. Shiro thought since she still had the mental map she had created the first day she was in the slums. I should try to get Jade Ice as soon as possible and stay near the tent for a few days. I don't want the girls to be kidnapped when I'm away after all. Arriving at the auction house, she wasn't surprised to see that it was currently busy at the moment. Since this was a higher level city, it meant that the competition for the final items were that much more intense. Hello, what are the requirements to have a seat at the second floor of the auction? One that gives me a good overview of the entire auction room, Shiro asked the receptionist. The second floor rooms are only reserved for members that have more than 250 million US dollars. It is also reserved for members that put a rare item on for auction. Naturally, we'll have to appraise the item to make sure that it is rare enough to grant the seller a spot on the second floor. The receptionist replied professionally. A rare item. I can probably pick something I got from the Blood Kingdom dungeon. Shiro thought since the amount of loot she had gained from the dungeon was outrageous, especially since she had 100% of the loot. I have a few level 50 items I wish to put on sale. Some are even purple grade. We'll have to appraise the items first, is that okay? Due to the items being only level 50, we may not be able to give you a spot on the second floor, she said. Shiro nodded and followed after her. Entering a room, She saw a man that looked like he was in his late 40s. His gray hair was tied up into a low ponytail that made him look rather dignified. His face had a few wrinkles, but it didn't take away the fact that he was rather handsome in his prime. He wore a pair of glasses and a suit that was decorated with gold lining to show his identity as a high-ranked member of the auction house. On his chest, a badge that showed Senior Appraiser could be seen. Alfred LVL 50 Grand Alchemist. Seems like he is a retired adventurer, or else he would not look this old for such a low level. Shiro thought to herself. Please take out the items you would like me to appraise, Alfred said whilst adjusting his glasses. Following his instructions, Shiro placed all the items she wouldn't mind selling on the table. The sheer amount of the loot caused Alfred's mouth to twitch. However, his eyes widened when he saw the descriptions and effects of the loot. All of these have no requirements? Alfred cried out. None. Shiro smiled. That means even level 20s can equip these items. However, it's mostly a matter of if they're able to carry the weapons, since there is obviously the weight of the weapons hindering them. Otherwise, it is completely restriction-free. Not only that, but the innate attribute of life steal and even mana leech makes these items very valuable. Alfred analyzed. Are you sure you want to put these out for auction? Wouldn't you have more use for them? Alfred asked, unsure as to why she was willing to part with these items. Every item had a durability value. Over time, items would slowly break apart, causing problems during a fight. The damage they took would eventually pass the threshold of the durability and break the item. This was why most adventurers would carry more than 2 sets of items on them at all times. Weapons, armors, and accessories. And yet, just in this pile, he was able to see several sets of decent weaponry along with armor. While the skills they came with were rather mundane, the base grade and innate stat numbers of the weapon made them valuable. There were 2 reasons as to why the little girl in front of him would even take these out. Either she already has items that are worth the same or even more than those items, or that she doesn't know their true value. Alfred thought to himself. However, when he saw her calm demeanor, he knew that she understood the true value of the items. Not only that, the calmness in her eyes weren't something often seen in young adventurers, especially not any around her age. Her file states that she is around the age of 13, but her calm yet oppressive aura says otherwise. Alfred furrowed his brows slightly. The last time he saw anyone with a remotely similar aura she had now was when he observed a level 100+ government official. And even then, he was only calm since he could kill everyone on sight with a swipe of his hand. This girl in front of him, on the other hand, was only level 43 in the presence of level 50s. And to make matters worse, his aura paled in comparison to this girl. Yes, I would like to put these on auction. However, I do hope that I am given a second-floor room to oversee the auction. Shiro smiled calmly. Of course. Let me just inspect the rest of these items. Alfred nodded. The more he looked through the items, the more amazed and shocked he was. Hardly any of the items lacked the traits of either lifesteal or mana leech. In addition to this, none of them had restrictions, so even low-level adventurers could equip these, which in turn would lower the mortality rate. For D-classed adventurers, those were priceless lifesaver items that would keep them safe in the dungeons. Not only that, but they could also help several peak D-class adventurers to finally complete the requirements to advance onto the next class. After going through all of the loot, Alfred could only describe this pile of loot as borderline priceless. The items here are more than enough to grant you a spot of the second floor. But you do realize that if you expose this to other adventurers, the chances of them wanting to kill you for these items increases. And if you didn't know already, the law of killing is out the window on every auction night. If they knew that you had these, you would have parties of level 50 adventurers coming for your head. Plus, what's to say that I won't just take these items right here and now? Alfred said seriously, as he wanted to give her a fair warning. Hearing what he had said, Shiro grinned coldly as she let a little bit of her killing intent leak out. If that was the case, I'll be glad to show them exactly how I managed to survive a level 50 mutated dungeon. Alfred paled when he felt the sliver of killing intent. Believing that Shiro only let it leak out since she couldn't control it properly, he knew that she was dead serious about fighting level 50s should it come to that. Well, I'm already retired, so I have no use for any of these items. But I do need to warn you to not casually expose your loot to just anyone. The moment some of these items catches the attention of a few unlawful people, they wouldn't think twice about killing you for the items. While you might be able to handle level 50s, what about level 60? Or even level 70? Alfred reminded once more as he took out a laptop and started to tap away. Shiro nodded since she too knew that carelessly exposing her loot would bring her grave danger. However, if only he knew that she was still holding back a large portion of the loot that she had earned. What he called borderline priceless was only around 20% of her loot. Not only that, but it was mostly the bad loot that she had collected. She only added a few pieces of high-quality equipment to guarantee her spot on the second floor. She didn't have any use for them anyways. She already had her blood crystal armor set. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to upgrade it since it would devour the set bonus and make it unusable. That was one of the smaller downsides to nanotech armor. She wasn't able to make any set equipment. After waiting a few short moments for Alfred to finish tapping away at his laptop, an assistant walked into his room and handed him a few files. All right, I've registered everything and the manager has agreed to give you a spot on the second floor. Not only that, a few of your items would be featured near the end of the auction along with our main attractions. Alfred said as he handed her a sheet of paper to make sure that everything was correct. Not only that, but here is the gold VIP auction card that allows you a loan of 150 million US dollars with no interest and access to the second floor rooms. The debt can be paid in items as well. Receiving both the card and sheet of paper, Shiro glanced at the paper briefly and memorized all of its contents. Everything is correct. I believe I can go to the second floor of the auction hall now, or do I have to wait? Shiro asked. You may go right now if you wish. But do remember that as the paper had stated, the auction house will take 5% of the profits. Alfred smiled apologetically since he couldn't choose how much the auction house took. 5% was quite high for an auction house to take from the overall profits. Normally, it would be 1 to 3% instead of 5%. It's fine. Shiro nodded and stood up. She was mostly just selling the items to help her get to the second floor. Everything else was just a bonus. Walking into the spacious auction hall, Shiro made her way up to the second floor. Her appearance caused a slight commotion since they never expected a small girl to have access to the second floor. However, most of the people only guessed that she was there just to look around. Excuse me, ma'am, but I need proof to let you enter the second floor. A staff asked as he stopped her from going up. Shiro nodded and pulled out the gold VIP card. I'm sorry for holding you back. Enjoy your stay, ma'am. The staff nodded and bowed while gesturing for her to proceed onto the second floor. Upon arriving at the second floor, Shiro saw that quite a few rooms were already occupied. Seems like the purple items attracted a lot of attention this time. Looking down at her VIP card, she saw that she was in room 25. After walking for a short moment, she entered the room. Unsurprisingly, the room was decorated lavishly with beautifully crafted furniture and crystal chandeliers. The rooms were spacious and she was able to have a good view of the entire auction hall. Nodding in satisfaction, Shiro sat down on one of the chairs that gave her the best view of the entire place. Unfortunately, she had to pull it a little closer to the edge since the railings weren't made with her height in mind. Her white hair caused quite a few pairs of eyes to turn to her since it contrasted against the dark walls. When did we have such a beautiful kid on the second floor? Do you think she's part of the refugees? I haven't seen her around at all. Jonathan, go gather some information about her. It's rather odd for a refugee to be able to enter the second floor this quickly, especially since it's very hard to have a bank of more than 250 million US dollars when you're in a city such as New York. Ignoring the small commotion that started due to her appearance, Shiro checked back at the forums to see how the thread was going. It would be best if she could acquire the Jade Ice quicker. That way, she would need to kill less and avoid the chances of failing her star up. When she opened the thread, she was surprised to see a few people stating that she could probably ask for some from a high-ranking member of the Alchemists Association. This was due to the fact that the material was rather precious since they could be made into empowering potions that worked extremely well in ice-type dungeons. Wasn't Alfred a grand alchemist? I could probably ask him after the auction for the jade ice. Problem being, if he is willing to sell it to me. Shiro thought to herself. Scrolling through a few of the replies, she found that there was a small vein of jade ice not too far away from the city of Kairosa. The only thing stopping them from harvesting the jade ice was due to the fact that the vein was protected by a level 65 elite grade monster. Not only that, but because the monster wasn't restrained by the dungeon, it was many times stronger than its dungeon counterpart. I can probably use my martial arts to steal a few chunks of the jade ice if I'm not able to buy any from Alfred. That leaves only one task left. I need to create another skill. Creating skills was just a case of making what you imagine a reality. The hardest part about this was for the system to recognize the potential of the skill and actually register it. An example being her frozen slumber skill. Pre-registration, the skill had 2 magic circles that restrained the monster while it slowly killed them. But after it was registered as part of the Frozen Hell series of spells, the skill had increased its magic circles to a total of 6, which massively increased the spell's power. What to do? Shiro muttered. Even in her past life, she had hardly created any skills due to the fact that most of her combat prowess came from what she could create and her body movement. From what she could tell, the Frozen Hell series was just a fluke that she had somehow managed to stumble across. Since the Frozen Slumber skill is mostly a control-type area of effect skill, I should probably try to make a single target skill that heavily emphasizes on my attacking power. Rubbing her finger on Yin's head, Shiro pondered about what the skill could be whilst waiting for the auction to start. The ice element is primarily focused on control. Even the most offensive skill I know that belongs in the ice element, when boiled down, is just freezing someone really quickly. That being said, I can probably make something that travels straight to the heart and freeze it. They may have strong outside defenses, but on the inside they're defenseless. Raising a finger, Shiro closed her eyes and started to visualize the skill that she wanted to create. However, even though her visualization was strong, her body simply couldn't keep up with the demand. Her eyes snapped open as she pulled out a towel and brought it to her mouth. Kuh. Coughing out a mouthful of blood, Shiro winced at the pain. Tsk, goddammit, she muttered. What she had visualized was a super condensed snowflake that was very hard to melt. What would happen was that the snowflake would be inhaled by her enemies and eventually pass by the heart. The moment it did, it would expand itself to pierce the heart, whilst also freezing the body from the inside out. Unfortunately, her mana links couldn't stand the pressure of creating the snowflakes that would essentially one-hit kill anyone who breathed near her. That being the case, she would also need to watch out for friendly fire. After all, a skill wouldn't be good if it also killed your teammates. Wiping the blood from her mouth, Shiro took a deep breath and waited for the auction to start. Thank you all for joining us today at the Kairosa auction. Since we have quite the stock of items to sell today, especially since we even got a few last-minute surprises, I'll cut the small talk and introduce to you the first item. The auctioneer shouted out as Shiro opened her eyes. With an auction in a city this big, she should be able to find quite a few useful items. The first item to kick of this auction is a skill stone. Yes, you heard me right. The fabled skill stone that grants you whichever skill is hidden inside the skill stone. Not only that, but we have a total of 3 skill stones to auction. Shiro widened her eyes the moment she heard that. Skill stone already? Even for a big city like Kairosa, a skill stone should still be extremely rare, and yet, there were 3 skill stones being auctioned. The first skill stone has the Skill Warden's Protection, a tanker skill that increases the defenses of your teammates. The increase is equal to half of your own defense, plus, it also gives them a barrier that is equal to 20% of your HP. The bidding starts at 50 million, with no less than 1 million increments. I bid 60 million, 65 million, 80 million. Shouts for the prices could be heard as Shiro thought about the item. From what the auctioneer had described, a skill like this was a godsend. But naturally, there had to be downsides to the skill as well. With bonuses like that, the downside would probably something along the lines of weakening the caster. Glancing over at her own income, Shiro could only shake her head. Right now she had a balance of 59 million. And yet, The first bet had already put her out of the bidding competition. Welp, robbing it is, Shiro thought to herself and glanced at the current highest bidder. However, they were soon replaced by someone on the second floor. Bing. An astronomical value of 150 million appeared on the balcony of one of the rooms. The bidder was a young man with short black hair. Besides him were two bodyguards that looked almost identical. They both wore a suit and black shades that hid their eyes. Oh my, seems like you're rather intent on buying this item, huh? Enough that you'll pay 150 million to get it. A woman called out. She was also on the second floor and wore a dress of red that gave the feeling of elegance. Paired with her blonde hair and alluring aura, it was hard to take one's eyes off her. Himph. Naturally, I have a use for this skill. The man scoffed. Well, if that's the case, I'll play along with you. 200 million. Bing. Along with her call, the man's bid was overridden by her bid. Seeing what she had done, he only narrowed his eyes before increasing the bid to 250 million. Oh my, bravo young master, bravo. The woman clapped her hands before increasing the bid to 300 million. Does your Kasadin family want to oppose me? He shouted out as he increased it to 400 million. Ha ha ha, of course not. I'm just here for a friendly bid. Since young Master Locks wants this item so much, I'll naturally concede it to you. The woman laughed gently before giving up the bid. Shiro only raised an eyebrow when she saw all of this. The woman had no intention to buy the stone to begin with. Seems like a little feud is going on between the two. 400 million once. 400 million twice. 3 times. Sold to young Master Locks. The auctioneer said whilst hitting his hammer down. He had a grin on his face as the estimated value was around 150 million, since the skill would heavily weaken the tank with the defenseless debuff. Yet, the conflict between the two families propelled the price to 400 million. Young Master Locks only grumbled slightly before sitting back down with a frown on his face. The conflict between his family and the Kasadin family had been going on for quite some time now. It was to the point that only one could remain in the city, and he was going to make sure that it was his family. The second skill stone contains the skill Combust, a simple fire skill that when paired with a strong sense of visualization will become extremely deadly. Bidding starts at 10 million, with an increment no less than 1 million. 10 million. 11 million. Compared to the last skill stone, this one was rather tame. Perhaps I should get it as well. Shiro thought to herself and decided to bid. Bing. A value of 15 million appeared on her balcony. The reason to why she wanted to bid was due to the fact that Lyrica could probably make use of it. That being said, she could also make something interesting with it as well. Ignoring that fact that she's a snow girl and that this could probably injure her as well, she had a theory that she wanted to test out. But rather than a theory, she wanted to see if she could recreate the cold fire. Fire is a plasma and it is hot. That is an obvious fact. However, if she just changed the gas that was being supplied to create the fire through controlling her mana, she would be able to decrease the temperature of the fire. Not only that, but if she cooled the gas to a low enough temperature, the fire would even start to freeze the things that it came into contact with. The gas in question was helium. Helium had the property of being able to dissipate the heat quickly whilst also meeting the requirements of creating the plasma/fire. With helium being able to dissipate the heat quickly, if she lowered the temperature of the helium, she would then be able to create cold fire. Author's comment. This is true, by the way. If you go on YouTube and search up the video, How to Make a Cold Fire Torch by the Action Lab, you'll see that cold fire is a real thing. There is also a part 2 where he lowers the temperature so low that it starts to freeze things. Little Een, I think I've just thought of what my next spell for the Frozen Hell series is going to be. Shiro smiled as she rubbed Yin's head. Een only gave her a side glance before shrugging her shoulders. Shiro smiled wearily as Een was rather lazy most of the time. Really makes you wonder where she gets it from. Shiro thought to herself. There were hardly anyone around her that was lazy, so she couldn't have copied her behavior from the surrounding influences. That means it's probably in her genes to be this lazy. The bidding continued for a short moment before Shiro won the skill stone for a grand total of 21 million US dollars. And last but not least, The third skill stone contains the high-level fire spell Hellfire Bombardment. What? Hellfire Bombardment? They're selling Hellfire Bombardment. A ruckus was instantly stirred when they heard of the skill's name. Even Shiro was shocked at the fact that they were auctioning the skill Bombardment. The skill Hellfire Bombardment was a tier-down version of the Tier 4 destruction spell, Meteor Shower. The skill would summon out a sky full of fireballs that would simultaneously combust upon impact with the target. Not only that, the skill would also increase the fire damage of your teammates, whilst also giving the boss a debuff that weakened their defenses. Such an outrageous skill had a high requirement for learning, and yet, it was here in the form of a skill stone. This alone would make the high-level adventurers in the area disregard the auction house rules of no fighting inside the premises and kill whoever got their hands on the skill. They couldn't risk the skill being learned after all. Without even waiting for the auctioneer to call out the starting price, a few of the second-floor guests had began calling out the prices. 500 million. 600 million. 800 million. I'd like to see who dares fight me for this. Locke shouted out. 1 billion. My Kassadin family isn't afraid of your Cermak family. Alara Kassadin. You want me to kill you right here and now? 1.1 billion. Locke shouted out with rage. Who's afraid of who? 1.3 billion. She shouted back as fire erupted around her to signify her intent to battle right here and now. Enough. A dominating voice boomed out as a crushing pressure enveloped the entire auction hall. Locke and Alara, who were the target of the pressure, quietened down instantly. Hearing the clambering around the auction hall, Shiro understood that this man was the branch master of the auction house. He wore a suit that was slightly stretched due to his muscles. He looked like he was in his early 30s with slight signs of age on his face. His overall visage gave him a heroic, handsome type of aura. As the current branch master of the auction house, I will not tolerate any fighting inside the hall. Either bid like civilized people, or you can scram the fuck out of my building. He glared at the two. Feeling his pressure, the two of them sat down. 1.5 billion. Locke called out after taking a deep breath. 1.7 billion. Alara followed up. Giving her a side glance, he narrowed his eyes. 2 billion. 2.1 billion. 2.2 billion. Eventually, the bidding ended at an astonishing 2.5 billion, with Alara Kassadin winning the final bid. Locke only clutched his hand as his gaze became cold. Go tell the family that Alara has won the skill Hellfire Bombardment. We're going to kill her tonight, he said with a low voice. One of the bodyguards nodded and left the building. While Locke was planning on killing Alara, she wasn't idle either. Tell my father to bring some more reinforcements. We never expected the auction house to sell Hellfire Bombardment, she said to her bodyguard. Meanwhile, Shiro, who had watched everything happen, knew that the city was going to experience a lot of bloodshed tonight. Shiro, Lyrica, tell everyone to avoid entering the city. There's going to be a war between two families. Lyrica, all right. Putting away her phone, she waited for the next few items. The items didn't cause as much of a ruckus as the bombardment skill, but they were impressive items by themselves. However, Shiro didn't have much use for them since all of her current equipment were good enough as it is. The next item is a little special since it is the permission to enter a certain holy ground, the auctioneer said mysteriously, which caused a few ears to perk up at the mention of holy ground. The holy ground in question is the Mana Springs. Guarded by one of our city's most powerful family, the Aspar family, the Mana Springs is a place where you are able to reinforce and increase your mana storage. Just a single dip in these springs can increase your fighting potential by many folds. Bidding starts at 5 million with an increment of at least 500,000. Hearing what the auctioneer had said, Shiro was rather curious about the Mana Springs. This was something she had never heard about back in her old life, so she didn't know if it would help with fixing her mana links. However, just in case, she was willing to see if she could bid a spot for herself. Unfortunately, before she could even place her bid down, the price had already reached 10 million, causing her lips to twitch slightly. After buying the skill stone, she only had a balance of 38 million. I can probably spend more on this since the other items can just be stolen, Shiro thought whilst placing a bid of 12 million. The price continued to climb and only slowed down when it reached 20 million. In the end, Shiro won the bid with a total of 21 million, leaving her with only 17 million left in her balance. Shaking her head, Shiro couldn't help but sigh at the cost of items. The following items were all out of her reach since she didn't have the balance to bid for any of them. But even if she did have the balance, she wouldn't have bid anyways since she had no use for them. She would occasionally glance at the people on the second floor to remember their appearance, especially since most of the people on the second floor had pretty large influences in this city. Pulling out her phone, she researched a little on both families and were quite surprised by what she had found out. Both families were quite big in the industry of being hired bodyguards for ships that sailed out to sea. Not only that, but they were also rivals in other markets such as weapons production and potion production. However, even though they were both powerhouses, the Aspar family had always been number one and couldn't be toppled. While the main reason wasn't known, there were a few ideas floating around. From their connection to larger cities, high-level experts and their mana spring to the fact that they dabbled in every market and were essentially the core foundation to city of Kairosa. Should the Aspar family ever disappear, the city would be in grave danger. While she was researching about the three families, the auction continued without stopping, and it neared the end of the auction. Watching the auction, Shiro only smiled when she saw that her requirementless items caused quite the stir amongst the lower-level adventurers. Overall, including her purple-grade items that were put on auction, she had earned herself over 150 million US dollars. Naturally, she needed to wait until the auction ended to claim her money and items. Soon it was time for the final three items that were supposedly the highlight of this auction. However, Shiro didn't know how they could topple the appeal of the skill stones. First, we shall bring all of the remaining items on the stage, so you may see which one you wish to buy first. The auctioneer said as several ladies walked up onto the stage with the items in hand. The purple grade bow, shield, and the mysterious item set. When Shiro saw the item set, she was shocked. No wonder they placed that as the final item, she thought with a small smile. The item set in question was a purple plus grade item known as chaotic sword formation. They were different from normal formations as this one was portable. One would gain control over 4 flying swords that would work in tandem to kill the user's enemies. The reason as to why it was known as chaotic sword formation was due to the fact that the swords attack at an outrageous speed. The user only needed to control one sword while the other 3 would be autonomous and attack in chaotic patterns that would complement how the user controlled the first sword. One of the best part about this item set was the fact that the user could set them as automatic defenses while they used another weapon such as the axe. They could essentially ignore thoughts about defense since the swords themselves would do it for them. However, that wasn't the main selling point of these weapons. The greatest part of these weapons was that they could count as any set material, meaning that they could enhance the set effects one has without being a part of that set. Example being her Blood Crystal Armor set. Currently, at 6 of 6 pieces, the Blood Crystal Armor set gave her a bonus of plus 200 in INT, AGI, VIT, plus 50 mana leech and plus 50 lifesteal. The sword formations would then automatically increase the effect to the next tier, 9 pieces. Even though her armor didn't have 9 pieces, the swords themselves will upgrade the set. It was a wonder how this was even allowed to appear at such a low-level city. Before anyone can bid, I'll display the equipment status board for all of you to see. The auctioneer called out as 3 images appeared in the air through a holographic projection. Chromatic Piercer LVL60, Bow, Purple. Requirements: C-Class 2000 DX, 1500 STR, Bow Mastery. Plus 600 Attack. Plus 500 Pierce. Plus 300 Multi-Shot. Plus 50% Elemental Damage. Plus 150 Arrow Flight Speed. Plus 100 Target Acquisition. Plus 100 Range. Skills: Chromatic Spectrum, Chromatic Focus. Chromatic Spectrum. When activated, the arrow will split itself into 10 homing arrows that will seek out your targets. Each arrow will have a randomized element associated with it. Plus 100 elemental damage and piercing when activated. Cost: 10,000 MP per activation. Duration: until arrows hit the targets. Cooldown: 5 minutes. Chromatic focus must be activated whilst chromatic spectrum is active. The 10 arrows will combine into a single arrow that has increased piercing and attack power, plus 200 attack and pierce when activated. Cost: 20,000 MP per activation. Duration: until the arrow hits the target. Cooldown: 10 minutes. Looking at the description for the purple bow, chromatic piercer, Shiro was surprised by its stats and couldn't help but nod in appreciation. If it wasn't for the fact that she had her firearms, she would be tempted to obtain this bow. After reading the description for the bow, she glanced at the shield. Aegis of Blessed Fortune LV60, shield, purple. Restrictions: C-Class, 2500 DF, 1000 STR, shield mastery. Plus 700 def. Plus 500 STR. Plus 30% critical resistance. Plus 50% aggro build-up. Plus 30% chance of damage reflection. Plus 20% physical resistance. Plus 20% magic resistance. Plus 10% luck. Skills: Blackout, Fortunate Regeneration, Immobilizing Aura. Blackout: silence the enemy for a short moment in which they're not able to use any skills. Plus 60% aggro during this moment of time. Cost: 25,000 MP per activation. Duration: between 30 seconds and 1 minute. Depends on randomized luck. Cooldown: 2 minutes. Fortunate Regeneration: regenerate health based on all damage taken in the past 30 seconds. Health regenerated ranges between 20% and 100%. Cost: 25,000 MP per activation. Duration: 2 seconds. Cooldown: 5 minutes. Immobilizing Aura: decrease the overall speed, including attack speed, of the enemy for a short moment of time. Decrease ranges from 20% to 50%. Cost: 20,000 MP per activation. Duration: ranges from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Cooldown: 5 minutes. A shield where the strengths of the skills are randomized. Shiro thought with mild interest. However, as interested as she was, she could probably find a more consistent shield for Madison when they reach C-Class. That only left the item set. Out of the three, this was what had her attention the most. Nirvana Soul Blades, Flying Sword Formation, Purple Plus, can only be equipped when the user passes the sword trial linked with these blades. A set of blades left behind by the ancients. Embedded with a mysterious power, these blades grow alongside their owner should they be worthy. Skills are tailored to the user after they pass the test. Users are only allowed one attempt at the test. Seeing the description on the blades, Shiro was surprised at the fact that the blades were growth-type blades. Even if they didn't include the fact that they grew alongside the user, Shiro knew that they would cause quite a stir. However, it seemed like not everyone shared the same thoughts since they were more attracted by the bow and shield rather than the swords. This could also be attributed to the fact that the sword looked rather average when compared to the weapons. The chromatic piercer was a bow that looked like it was made from a 7-colored crystal, while the Aegis of Blessed Fortune looked like a divine relic. Meanwhile, the Nirvana Soul Blades were plain long swords that weren't decorated at all. It didn't seem like a purple plus item, and to make matters worse, they couldn't see the stats either. This heavily downplayed the actual value of the blades, making Shiro wonder if she could bid for it without actually stealing it. We'll first start with the chromatic piercer. Bidding starts at 150 million, with increments of no less than 10 million. 200 million. The first bid had instantly increased the price by 50 million. This caused Shiro to glance over at the caller and realized who they were. If I remember from what I had read, he is someone belonging to the Dermark family, a family who are only inferior to the top 5 and is famed for their archers. Shiro thought before turning her attention away. Whoever won the bow was none of her concern since her eyes were on the real treasure. Unfortunately, or rather fortunately, none of the big families seems to know the true value of the blades. This caused a few questions to be raised in her head as she searched the web for sword formation items. However, to her surprise, not many knew of the power behind the sword formations. They only knew that they were high-grade items. Could it be that not a lot of people passed the test for these swords? Shiro thought to herself, as anyone who passed the test were able to experience an astonishing increase to their battle potential. Well, it's good news for me. Letting the people bid for the 2 purple grade items, Shiro waited patiently for the bids to start for the sword formation. Since her loot from the mutated dungeon earned her more than 150 million US dollars, she'll be able to use that to purchase the Nirvana Soul Blades. In the end, the Chromatic Piercer was won by the Dermark family for 350 million US dollars, while the Aegis of Blessed Fortune was won by the Cermak family for 500 million. For our last item, we have the mysterious Nirvana Soul Blades. This set of swords were excavated from the deep-sea ruins that lay buried under the ocean. We were fortunate enough to find this purple plus grade item during our last excursion to the ruins. Unfortunately, we weren't able to pass the test to earn the ownership of this item, the auctioneer said as he brought everyone's attention to the blades. However, it should be noted that anything graded purple plus will most definitely be more powerful than the Chromatic Piercer and the Aegis of Blessed Fortune. Therefore, we shall start this bid with 100 million US dollars with increments of no less than 1 million US dollars. 100 million. 105 million. 106 million. Sadly, the Nirvana blades didn't garner as much hype as the other 2 weapons did. The bids were increasing very slowly, and Shiro could even see a slight amount of disappointment on the branch master's face when he saw this. Bing. 120 million. Placing her bid of 120 million, Shiro sighed at the fact that she has basically blown over her entire earnings for today. The intervals between bids stated to increase as the auctioneer tried to get as much value out of the blades as he could. Eventually, Shiro won the blades with 150 million US dollars. Standing up from her balcony, Shiro placed Ian back onto her shoulder and started to make her way towards the counter where she would receive her earnings for tonight along with paying for the items that she won. On her way there, she could see both Alara and Locke's glaring daggers at each other. However, they stopped when they saw Shiro. "Young miss, can you spare a moment for a short chat?" Locke asked as he smiled. Shiro was taken aback at this and pulled out her phone. "Me?" "Yes, indeed, Miss Shiro." He smiled. But before he could continue his talk, Alara butted in. "Don't fall for that scheming smile of his. Pooey, you don't know how many young girls he had ruined because of his playboy nature." Alara spat out whilst walking over to Shiro and handed her a card. "The Kasadan family would like to invite you for a small chat about a partnership between us. If you're interested, feel free to contact us through the information on the card." She smiled. Taking the card, Shiro nodded slightly whilst wondering what she could have done to garner their attention, especially when one of the biggest families in the city wanted to talk about a partnership with her. Locke wasn't going to be left behind and also handed her a card. "Don't make the wrong decision, young miss. Because after tonight, the Kasadan family is bound to suffer a great setback," he said whilst giving Alara a cold glare. The reason as to why they both wanted to form a partnership with the white-haired girl in front of them was due to the fact that they had discovered that she essentially carried her team to safety when they entered a level 50 mutated dungeon. The party members that made up the dungeon consisted of an average level of 34, and when she entered, she was only 37. With those members, there were hardly any chance for them to survive. In addition to this, help wasn't going to come anytime soon due to 2 reasons. Number 1, they were foreigners of another city, and the high-level adventurers weren't willing to go out of their way to save them. And 2, the loot drops would decrease in quality once adventurers break open the dungeon. This meant that not only were they going to get a debuff for breaking open the dungeon, but there wasn't even any loot for them. With these 2 facts, the high-level adventurers of Kairosa collectively decided to wait for the party to die in the dungeon. And yet, they had managed to miraculously survive a dungeon more than 10 levels above them with a casualty of only 2 of their members. Not only that, but she had already leveled up 6 times within the short amount of time in the dungeon, meaning only one thing. She had killed most of the monsters solo. With that kind of capability against level 50 monsters, she was definitely a hidden gem waiting to be discovered. "I'll be sure to contact one of you." Shiro smiled politely since it would spell more trouble if she made her stand clear right now. Not only that, but there wasn't any point of linking up with either family since she was doing pretty well right now. The duo nodded before leaving. Unfortunately, it was a little awkward since Shiro was going the same way. That feeling of heading the same way as someone, even though you've just bid farewell to each other, made for a rather weird atmosphere between the three of them. But once they arrived at the collection counter, the weird atmosphere was dispelled since they were led into separate rooms. Shiro sighed in relief since she really didn't know how to handle awkward moments like that. If the silence had continued any longer, she was tempted to just say F***ck it and go on ahead of them despite it being a little rude. Shiro waited for a short moment until a man entered the room. Since one of her items were the main attractions, she was allowed a separate room to collect these items. Miss Shiro, here are the items that you have won. A skill stone and the Nirvana soul blades, along with the money you have earned during this auction. As for how much you need to pay us, that totals up to 171 million US dollars. Naturally, you can pay 160 million with your earnings and the remaining 11 million with the system balance. The man smiled and handed her the payment crystal. Shiro nodded and paid 11 million. Receiving both her items, Shiro instantly stored them away in her inventory and left the room. She was going to find a good vantage point for the mini-war that's about to break out and hopefully get herself a few items along the way. Leaving the building, Shiro looked around for a short moment before jumping up towards one of the taller buildings. However, mid-flight, she had received a text regarding her third and final purchase. Hello, Miss Shiro. As the winner of the Mana Springs permission, the Aspar family will conduct this transaction at the family mansion. Since this is a permission pertaining the access of our Mana Springs, we'll send you an exact date soon. Reading the text, Shiro only raised an eyebrow. I was wondering why they never gave me anything regarding this. So the Aspar family did this transaction personally. Shiro thought to herself. That being said, it was a spur-of-the-moment decision after all. She wasn't even sure if this will heal her mana links. Sitting down, Shiro pulled out the skill stone as she planned to create the cold fire before the fighting actually started. Skill stone. Combust. Create a wisp of fire in your palms that is completely under your control. Cost. 500 MP/second. Duration. Not applicable. Cooldown. Not applicable. Activating the skill stone, Shiro watched it crumbled into dust. Let's hope this works. She muttered as she flicked her index finger upwards. A bright orange flame lit up on the tip of her finger. SSS. Shiro winced slightly as she quickly put the fire out. Frowning at the fact that her fire was still damaging her, Shiro couldn't help but sigh at the fact that she had a 25% vulnerability to fire. Sighing slightly, she started to work on creating the cold fire. Narrowing her eyes, she started to filter out the helium in the air so that it would be the fuel to her fire. Unfortunately for her, the air surrounding her only had a small amount of helium. However, that was enough for her since the moment the skill was registered, it would take her mana instead of helium. After a short moment of visualization, Shiro took a deep breath and snapped her fingers. A blue flame lit up on her finger as a grin crept up on Shiro's face. Unlike the previous flame, the blue flame didn't harm her at all. It was even slightly cool to the touch. However, that flame only lasted a short moment before fizzing out. Seems like just making the flame isn't enough to register it as a skill. I'll need to actually make it viable for battle before the system registers the attack as a skill. Shiro muttered as she held out her hand. Since the flame needed helium to take form, Shiro needed a large quantity of helium. RNBAS. Metal and lightning sparked for a short moment as she narrowed her eyes and sped up the construction process. Once the item finished its construction, Shiro held a cylindrical container. Helium filter. The item would help her constantly filter out helium from the surroundings while she was busy. Placing the container on her waist, she connected it with a clip made from nanotech. Hopefully, I should be able to gather enough helium to make a spell out of it. Shiro thought to herself as she pulled up her face mask. Glancing at her white hair, Shiro couldn't help but notice how much it shines under the moonlight. Furrowing her brows for a moment, she created a hood, chest armor, and some arm guards to help hide her identity. In addition to this, she also activated her disguise skill and edited what people would see when they saw her. LVL? Perfect. She smiled to herself. Plus, With the construction of her hood, Een had managed to have a new home. While it wasn't as comfy as the old hood, due to the fact that it was made from metal, it was good enough for Een. Her goal for participating in tonight's war was simple: rob a few people for a few items she had her eyes on during the auction. Most of these items were enhancement potions and other consumables that would help give Lyrica and Madison some extra protection while they were off dungeoning without her. Now that her level had propelled to 43, she was 8 levels above them. With such a difference, it would do more harm than good if she were to go to dungeons with them. That being said, it was only limited to dungeons. If they were to go into raids or excursions outside of the dungeon, she would join in since the monsters outside the dungeon were much stronger than the ones inside the dungeon. Crouching on the roof of her building, she narrowed her eyes whilst she scanned the surroundings for enemies. There are quite a few level 60s around here. From what I can see, most of them belong to the Kasidan family and the Cermak family. Boom. As if signaling the start of the war, several figures rushed out of the auction house and dashed towards their respective families. Bright orange orbs exploded into life above them as Shiro realized that Alara was immediately casting Hellfire Bombardment. Lox gritted his teeth for a moment before flicking his arms upwards. Magic circles appeared around him as lightning dragons could be seen clawing their way out of the magic circles. Boom 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 boom. The dragons collided with the fireballs and exploded into a multitude of colors in the sky. Just from a simple glance, one could tell that the dragons had been completely suppressed. The power of the Hellfire Bombardment is as strong as I remembered it to be, Shiro thought whilst the floor could be seen slowly freezing around her. Cooling herself down, she couldn't help but applaud Alara for her control over fire. Even with her distance, she could still feel the intensity of the flames. Without good visualization and control, that kind of output would be extremely hard, nearly impossible in fact. Not to mention, Alara had cast it without too much trouble, showing her talent as a fire user. However, Lox wasn't to be left behind either, since he was able to conjure up beasts of lightning one after the other without too much delay. Since he couldn't surpass Alara due to her power with the Hellfire Bombardment, he was going to overwhelm her with quantity. With the 2 young leaders of each family duking it out, the other members weren't to be left behind. Looking at the different types of skills flying through the air, Shiro couldn't help but marvel at the fact that it looked like a fireworks display. Minutes passed as the casualties shot through the roof. Not only that, but the fight was slowly moving away from the auction house, allowing the other winners of items to leave quickly while they could. Thomas LVL 50 Berserker. Seeing one of her targets run out of the auction house, Shiro narrowed her eyes and dashed after him. Style Phantom Arts. First Phantom Plus, Second Phantom Plus, Faded Snow Movement. Catching up with the adventurer, Shiro grabbed the back of his neck and slammed him into the ground. Sitting on his back, Shiro grabbed both of his arms and had her foot pressed against the back of his elbows so that she could break them quickly if she needed. Holding both arms with her right hand, she typed out her message with her left hand and showed him the phone. Hand over the items you've won at the auction. Reading the message, Thomas only gritted his teeth as he tried to break out of her grip. Crack crack. Breaking both of his arms quickly, Shiro flipped off his back and landed softly. Flicking her wrist, she instantly created Harbinger's song and aimed the gun at the man's head. Heh, we both know guns don't do shit anymore, he shouted out whilst lunging at Shiro. Activating several skills that bolstered his defense and strength, his body increased in size as a red glow encased him. Shiro only glanced at him coldly and pulled the trigger. Bang. The bullet shot towards Thomas and completely destroyed his head. Headshot. Shiro muttered and disassembled her hand cannon. Walking over to the headless corpse, she collected the loot. That's quite the inventory he had. Not too bad, she thought with a nod before parkouring up the side of the building. Looking at the destruction caused by the 2 families, Shiro couldn't help but applaud at the fact that they managed to not involve any bystanders. Not only that, but it seems like most of the houses were already empty. Seems like they've long evacuated. Shaking her head, she looked around for the second adventurer she had her eyes on. The item he won were several spell scrolls that contained high-tier D-ranked spells. If she got her hands on them, Lyrica and Madison would have a better chance to finish off a high-level boss should they need it. However, the moment she found her target, she saw that he was being pursued by a 2 level 50s. Well, 2 more victims doesn't change anything. Crouching down for a short moment, she put strength into her legs and ran towards the trio. Making 2 Harbinger's songs, Shiro also created suppressors on the end of the barrels. Jumping off the roof of her building, she grinned and aimed both guns towards the level 50s chasing her target. Suddenly feeling a sense of danger, they looked up to see a girl falling towards them with 2 guns pointed at their heads. Asterisk tisk tist. 2 suppressed gunshots rang out as she killed the 2 with ease. Grinning at the power behind the 2 hand cannons, Shiro pivoted on her foot and turned towards her target. Asterisk krrr. Ice shot towards him as it froze his leg. Asterisk tist. With her target frozen in place for a short moment, Shiro was able to shoot him on the back of his head. Disassembling the dual hand cannons once more, she collected the loot before leaving the area. While there was the choice of earning more loot, she knew that it was better to quit while she was ahead. Rift Walker. Her body immediately disappeared from where she stood. Hashtag hashtag hashtag. Arriving back at the slums, Shiro glanced over at the city and saw that the fight was still continuing. Seems like I've underestimated their feud for each other, Shiro thought, surprised. Now that she had obtained everything that she wanted, she made her way towards her lab. Taking out the Nirvana Soul Blades, she wondered if she should attempt the trial or not. Since I already have my weapons and armor, I'm pretty protected on all fronts. However, if I leave it for Lyrica, it'll solve her problem of having little to no defense since her Blade Dancer class is an extreme damage focus class. Shiro muttered as she debated on whether or not she should give the trial a try or not. Asterisk dang. She suddenly paused when she heard the echo of a footstep. While the echo was very quiet, she was still able to pick it up with her hearing. Narrowing her eyes, Shiro stood up. Seems like a few rats have found this place, she muttered before making herself a tiny drone. Sending it out to scan the building, she found 2 cloaked figures looked around wearily. Furrowing her brows, Shiro realized that they were from the slums. Well, it's the perfect chance for me to try make a new skill, she thought with a grin. Leaving her room, she made a pair of sound-absorbent boots. Once she was a room away from the invaders, Shiro created a few nanotech wires and controlled them using her mana. Once the duo from the slums walked into her wires, she flicked her wrist and tightened the wires around the invaders. Huh. They were shocked when their body was suddenly entangled by something that prevented them from moving. Quickly looking forwards, they saw their target reveal herself. Not too long ago, they had found a target that would have been classified as high-quality merchandise enter this abandoned building and thought that it would be easy. Little did they know, they picked the most dangerous person out of everyone that came from New York. Frozen Hell Series, Frozen Slumber. Waving her hands, several magic circles appeared around the men and chains lashed out at them. Gah! Crying out in pain, they knew that they were in danger. However, no matter what they did, the wires that bound them refused to break. The more they struggled, the more the wires cut into them. Seeing that everything was set up, Shiro proceeded to try out her new idea for the spell. Throwing the container that had all of the helium it had gathered towards the duo, Shiro snapped her fingers and a blue flame could be seen flickering on her finger. Making a finger gun that aimed towards the container, the blue flame shot towards the container before exploding out into a mass fire. The duo were confused as to why the flames didn't hurt but widened their eyes when they felt the freezing process increase in speed. When they opened their mouths to scream, Shiro only grinned as the fire entered their bodies. Snapping her fingers once more, the cold fire that entered their bodies heated up into blue fire. While they looked similar, blue fire was many times hotter than normal fire. With the blue fire burning them from the inside and the cold fire freezing them from the outside, they were in constant agony. Self-made skill recognized. Awarding 100 free stat points. Conditions met to be added to Frozen Hell series. Please name your skill within 10 seconds, or else the system will assign a name. Surprise me, system. Shiro smiled and decided to let the system make a name for the skill. Skill added. Frozen Hell, Azure Hellfire, skill added. Frozen Hell, Azure Hellfire. Ho, Azure Hellfire. Shiro raised an eyebrow as she glanced at the duo who had long turned to ash. Wondering about what kind of change the skill had experienced, she closed her eyes and thought about the activation process of the skill. So it has a requirement of frozen slumber to be activated first, Shiro muttered before shrugging her shoulders. She had plenty of time to test out the power of the skill, but right now, she had 100 free points for her to use. Name, Shiro. Race, Snow Girl, evolution criteria yet to be met. Title, Shadow Empress, intermediate monster, 750th humans killed. Fratricide, One Woman Battalion, creator of the Frozen Hell series, incomplete. Level, 43. Class, Snow Girl, Snowmancer. HP, 157, 500/157, 500. MP, 387, 135/387, 135. STR, 800, plus 100. VIT, 1000, plus 200. INT, 2300-2400, plus 550. AGI, 1500, plus 450. Dex, 1000, plus 100. Def, 400, plus 100. Equals title bonus. Unassigned points, 100-0. Attunements. Ice Tier 2. Lightning Tier 1. Metal Tier 0. Shadow Tier 1. Balance, 152,900,000 US. Equipment, tap to display. Skills. Snow Girl. Tier 2 Ice Magic, passive regeneration, blessed by ice, snow magic, faded snow movement, cold aura, icy touch, icy breath, ice field affinity. Nanomancer. Dagger creation, nanotech engineering Tier 2, sword creation, bow creation, heavy weapon creation, shield creation, armor creation, hand cannon creation RAOV Epsilon. Frozen Hell series. Frozen Slumber, Azure Hellfire. Other. Minimap, inspection, disguise, mana barrier. Shared skills, EAN. Shadow buff, Tier 1. Ice chain, Tier 1. Shadow cloak, Tier 1. Shadow talon, Tier 1. Rift walker, Tier 1. Absorption/redirection, Tier 1. Shadow affinity, Tier 1. Now that she had created her second skill, she was just waiting to gather the rest of the Jade Ice so that she could class up. I should probably make a list of what I need to do. Her first task was naturally to star up before doing anything else. Next was her key to Silver Moon Keep and following, which is the team trial, Swordmyth Springs. However, Swordmyth Springs was recommended for level 45s, and both Lyrica and Madison were still quite the distance from level 45. By then, she would have hopefully gotten her 5th star. I also need Nantion to help me get that Phoenix Rebirth pill. That reminds me, I need to deal with a certain assassin stalker as well, Shiro thought as she narrowed her eyes. Due to the commotion back in New York, it seemed like all the factions were required to resolve the totem ritual. With the danger of New York unresolved, it seems like it'll take a while for Winter's Grace to contact us about going to the faction branch as well, Shiro muttered while she cleaned up the scene. There was also the problem of the Nirvana Soul Blades. The best outcome were for Lyrica to claim ownership of these swords since Shiro believed that it would suit her well. Then there's also the Mana Springs and the Slumlords. Heis, so many things to do. That being said, I wonder how Jonas and all that are faring. After Trace and Paul died, Jonas retired while Sylvia would probably quit as well. She wasn't looking too well after the dungeon. Same with Erica. They're probably going to avoid me since I'm essentially a guillotine hanging over their heads. Shaking her head, Shiro sighed at the fact that there were so many things for her to take care of. But, putting aside the tasks that she could only do later, Shiro made her way back to the tents. Upon leaving the abandoned building, Shiro was surprised to see the fight still going on in the city. They're still fighting? They really do hate each other, don't they? Shiro asked Dean. Asterisk chirp. Dean only replied with an uninterested tone as she was still a little annoyed at the fact that Shiro got rid of her hood. After walking for a short while, the campsite could be seen. However, the atmosphere of the campsite was a little odd since quite a few adventurers were patrolling around the adventurer. Shirone, why did you take so long to come back? Kane cried out as she quickly pulled Shiro into the tent. What happened? Shiro asked. Recently, a lot of beautiful aunties and girls have gone missing, so they need to patrol around the area. They think it has something to do with the bad guys in the slums, and that they're only targeting beautiful people. With someone as beautiful as Shirone, they'll definitely target you. Kane reminded Shiro. Smiling softly, Shiro nodded and turned to the other girls in the tent. She could see that all three the mothers and daughters were concerned since this tent had Shiro, Lyrica, and Madison, who were definitely above average in the looks department. Especially Shiro. Surprisingly, though, Kine weren't as concerned about herself, but rather more about Shiro, stating that, "You're not allowed to go out until they sort the problem out." Shiro found that rather adorable and couldn't help but pinch her cheeks a little before nodding her head. All right, I'll stay behind for a short while to train with you, okay? Shiro smiled. She wasn't in too much of a rush anyway. As long as she doesn't kill any monsters or humans to level up for the time being, she would be fine. Kane nodded her head but kept on hugging Shiro. Chuckling to herself, Shiro patted Kane's head before turning to the slightly sour Lyrica right now. Seeing her expression, Shiro couldn't help but think of a child when they got their favorite toy stolen from them. Lyrica, I managed to get something good from the auction for you. Shiro typed out. This caused Lyrica to instantly perk up at the mention of Shiro getting her something. What did you get? She asked curiously. Pulling out the Nirvana Soul Blades, Shiro handed them over to her. I want you to take the trial and see if you can claim ownership of these weapons. What about you? Lyrica asked in shock. She never expected the gift that Shiro had given her was a set of purple plus grade items. Even though they looked plain right now, Lyrica knew that there were special items that would change forms once they linked up with the owner. She guessed that it was the case for the Nirvana Soul Blades. You need it more than I do. I have both offense and defense, but your class only gives you offense. What's your def stat right now? 50, not including any bonuses from equipment. Lyrica said embarrassingly. She hadn't put any points into def since her skills needed her to reach a certain amount of STR and AGI. To use these skills, she had fueled all of her skill points into places other than DF. Hearing what Lyrica had said, Shiro widened her eyes and stared at Lyrica in disbelief. How did you survive a hit from the boss? She asked, feeling a little fearful. During the boss fight, Lyrica had suffered a blow which should by logic end her. Well, my HP may or may not have been in the 100,000s. Lyrica blushed. 100,000? Shiro thought with shock. If it wasn't for her monster title, her HP would only be around 70k and her MP would be around 150k. But Lyrica was telling her that her HP was in the 100k range. Shiro simply couldn't believe that kind of passive point bonus her Blade Dancer class had given her. Every class, once they reached their second class up, automatically increased the stats upon level up. For her Snow Girl class, which is currently her main class due to her race, she would gain a significant boost to INT every time she leveled up. The bonus would outstrip stats like STR or VIT. However, if Lyrica had 100k HP when she was just in her level 30s, that meant that the passive bonus was outrageous for her VIT stat. Well, I guess that's more reason for you to equip these blades then. Hell, even I have 400 points in def, and I hardly gain any points in that area. Shiro replied. However, this time it was Madison's turn to be shocked. Since her class was Demon Knight, she needed both STR, VIT, and DF, which is why they were her best stats. Even the lowest out of them were around the 800s, and she knew how hard it was to get 100k health. Just a question from me, but what's the value of your strongest stat? Madison asked. 2,400 in INT, 1,200 in Street. Lyrica replied honestly. Her class was so extreme in the offensive department that her STR, VIT, and AGI were outrageous when compared to other adventurers her level. That being said, her other stats were piss poor. How the hell is your strongest stat 1,200? In street? Madison asked in shock. Race trait of elves, we get more stat points per level along with my class, giving me a lot of stats in STR, VIT, and AGI. Lyrica replied with a slight cough. Wait, then how the hell was your HP 100k? Even if you had 1,200 points in VIT, that would still only be 60k in the HP department. Madison asked. Well, I guess you girls can know. Lyrica replied after hesitating for a short moment. Tapping her chest, a pendant appeared. Elven Saint Blessings, orange. In times of danger, the Elven Saint will bless you with the power to survive a lethal blow. HPX 500%. Duration 10 seconds. Cooldown 5 days. Cannot be activated manually. Bound. Lyrica Valenstein. Looking at the equipment, Shiro couldn't help but be shocked at the fact that Lyrica had a levelless orange-grade equipment. Even though it was bound to her, it was still a bad idea should more people know about it. Shiro instantly hid the jewel with her hand, causing Lyrica to blush heavily since it looked like Shiro just reached out for her breasts. Air. Shiro, there's people here. Lyrica stammered in shock. Hide pendant. Now. Shiro typed out. Realizing that she was talking about the pendant, Lyrica couldn't help but want to cry since her hopes were shattered once more. Following her instruction of hiding the pendant, both Lyrica and Madison looked at Shiro curiously, wondering as to why she reacted rather strongly. Don't show that pendant casually. Even though it's bound to you, humans will think with the mindset of, if I can't have it, neither can you. Shiro warned sternly. All right. Both Lyrica and Madison nodded. Well, now that I know you're able to survive if anything bad were to happen, I'm not as worried anymore. Shiro sighed in relief. Taking out the empowerment potions and different skill scrolls, Shiro laid them out in front of them. Take these, they'll help you out massively in times of danger. Oh wow, all of these should be quite expensive, Madison muttered as she looked at the myriad of potions and scrolls that laid in front of them. Just rob a few people on auction night. No biggie. Shiro waved her hand nonchalantly. Both Madison and Lyrica felt their lips twitch hearing how nonchalant she was. Little sis, they're all in the level 50s to 60s, okay? Watching Lyrica and Madison split the loot amongst themselves, Shiro turned to the other girls in the tent. Since it's getting dangerous, each of you should keep a life-saving item on you as well. Shiro typed out whilst handing each of them some supplies. Thank you. The mothers nodded in appreciation. As for Kane, Shiro decided to give her something extra. Within the pile of loot that she had given her, there was a small chip attached to Kane. The chip would warn her if anything was to happen to Kane, and she would be able to track her down to help her. Naturally, both Lyrica and Madison had this chip as well. With everything done, they chatted for a little longer before going to sleep. ####. Waking up early in the morning, Shiro walked out of the tent and glanced towards the other camps. She could still see a few adventurers patrolling diligently. Shifting her gaze, she sat on the nearby tree and fed herself. Feeding Ian as well, Shiro opened her phone to look at the news. Regarding the miniature war last night, the winner was the Cermak family. Alara was currently heavily injured, and both families had lost a large amount of adventurers. However, while the Cermak family won, they had also lost the most amount of adventurers due to Alara's hellfire bombardment. With both families suffering from massive casualties, the city would be peaceful for a while. After waiting for a short moment, Lyrica woke up, but surprisingly, Madison was still sleeping. Are you going to tackle the Nirvana Soulblade trial now? Shiro asked with a smile. Yeah, even with my pendant, I need to have something else to rely on for defense. Otherwise, I'll just be courting death every time I challenge a dungeon. Lyrica nodded. Good luck, remember, since it's a trial, you won't die. Go wild. Shiro grinned. Lyrica nodded and pulled out the 4 blades. Taking a deep breath, she clasped her hands together as the surrounding mana started to gather towards her. This caused the adventurers to look towards her with curiosity, but immediately resumed their patrols. A magic circle appeared under her as her body started to fade. Shiro kept a smile on her face as she watched Lyrica enter the formation. Even if she didn't claim ownership of these weapons, Shiro could probably redesign them using her nanobots. While it may not be as powerful as they could be, it would be enough for now. After waiting for Lyrica to completely enter the trial space for the Nirvana Soul Blades, Shiro hopped off the tree and made her way to the city. Even though she promised Kane that she would stay put for a few days, she would feel bored if she just did nothing. Therefore, she wanted to use this time to continue her search for the jade ice that would help her with her star up. Walking along her usual route to the city, Shiro frowned slightly when she felt the presences of two people sneaking up on her. While normal adventurers would have a hard time discovering them, how could Shiro, who was at the apex in her past life, overlook them? Sighing for a slight moment, Shiro purposefully exposed an opening for the two to attack her. Did they see through it? Shiro thought to herself with a frown. This frown only deepened as they never took the bait. Could I have encountered two experts? That shouldn't be. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been so easy to discover. Shiro thought with a sigh. However, just as she sighed, the two reached out their hands in order to kidnap her. Even though her mind was wandering, Shiro was still accustomed to multitasking and could react to the situation easily. Since the two weren't anyone she knew, all restraints were unlocked as she went into instant kill mode. Kacha. Before the two even noticed what happened, Shiro had already broken their elbows. Grabbing their jaws with her hands, she stepped on their foot whilst tugging the jaws down with her full strength. PSHH. While she tugged downwards, her shoulder had collided with their throats and gave her the perfect moment to rip their jaws off. Shiro didn't know why, but a sadistic grin crept up on her face. She could even feel her joy for killing increase every passing second. Discarding the lower jaws in her hands, Shiro twisted her body so that she faced them. When the two men saw her face, they were both horrified at the fact that she looked like she was enjoying every moment of this. Her pupils glowed with an ominous blue light as sweat dripped down their backs. They cursed at their boss who had sent them on this mission. Within the next moment, Shiro had already plunged her hands down their throats whilst making blue fire inside their bodies. Seeing their pain, Shiro's grin only increased as she snapped her fingers and nanobots started to devour them from the inside out. After a short moment, all that remained of the two were slight traces of blood that had been splattered around the area. Well, that was refreshing, Shiro muttered as her expression reverted back to normal. Glancing at her hands, she started to wonder to herself. Seems like my restraint towards killing my enemies are harder to control? Shiro thought to herself. Meh, not like I restrained myself much when I killed them anyways. She shrugged her shoulders. It wasn't as if she never killed anyone before. However, the fact that her restraints that she had subconsciously placed on herself were loosening was a little concerning. Making a slightly complicated face, Shiro sighed. I've been a little too relaxed. I should probably take some time out to rein in all of my killing intent. She had been using it quite a lot during the time that she was in the dungeon. Naturally, that meant the control she had over it wasn't as sturdy. Once she had arrived at the city, Shiro proceeded to walk towards the Alchemist Association. On the way, Een was hungry again, causing Shiro to glance at her with an indescribable expression. Don't you think you're starting to eat a lot more now? Could it be like what happened to me and the E-ranked stones? Shiro asked. Een pondered for a moment and nodded. Shaking her head, Shiro pulled out a few D-ranked mana stones and handed them over to Een. However, Een had seen a little kid with a lollipop and had the odd desire to make something similar. Looking at the D-ranked mana stone, Een slapped Shiro's head to get her attention. Ow, didn't I just give you the mana stone? Why did you smack my head? Shiro asked as she glanced upwards. Looking at the kid that Een was pointing to, Shiro couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. You want a lollipop? Seeing Een nod, Shiro took the mana stone from her and made a stick using her nanobots. Naturally, out of people's sight. Chirp. Chirping in delight, Een grabbed the lollipop and stuffed it in her mouth. Looking at Een, Shiro couldn't help but chuckle at the fact that she was just like a spoiled baby sister. Well, I suppose that's not inaccurate. Glancing at Yin's blissful face, Shiro couldn't help but wonder what difference the stick made. Making herself a lollipop, she also stuffed it in her mouth. Oh my. Well, this is certainly a little different, Shiro muttered whilst eating her mana stone lollipop. Wait, I can get away with eating mana stones if they're like lollipops? Shiro thought as her eyes glistened slightly. There was always the problem of having to hide what she was eating when she went out with people. However, with her makeshift lollipops, she would be able to eat mana stones blatantly. Smiling with bliss at the new discovery, the pair of bird and snow girl attracted a few gazes. The fact that they were both eating lollipops with such a happy face caused a few people to chuckle and smile. Arriving at the Alchemist Association, Shiro popped a new lollipop in both hers and Yin's mouth before entering. The design of the Alchemist Association was much more orderly when compared to the other associations. There were signs everywhere, and everyone were working without too much delay in their actions. In addition to this, the scent of medicine and different concoctions drifted in the air, causing her to wrinkle her nose slightly. Since her senses were better than the average person, the stench was especially strong for her. Hello, welcome to the Alchemist Association. How may I help you today? The receptionist smiled warmly when she saw Shiro eating a lollipop along with her bird. It gave her the feeling that she was a curious child looking around the place. Yes, I would like to ask if I could purchase 3 pieces of jade ice. Shiro asked. 3 pieces of jade ice? We do have some in stock, but they're more expensive than the current market price since the demand is rather high right now. She smiled apologetically. That's no problem. How much is it in total? 3 pieces of jade ice will cost a total of 39 million US dollars. Hearing the price, Shiro felt the corner of her lips twitch. Paying the money, the receptionist soon returned with 3 pieces of the jade ice. Sighing in relief that she had fulfilled everything she needed for her star-up, Shiro left the building and walked towards a low-level dungeon. She didn't want to star up in the middle of the street after all. Arriving at the Giant's Heart dungeon once more, Shiro snuck inside and made sure that there were no enemies around her during her star-up. Looking at her system interface, she pressed yes for the star-up. A blizzard suddenly picked up around her as Ian was thrown backwards. Shiro had to grit her teeth, feeling the piercing cold. After becoming a snow girl, she had never once felt cold, but this blizzard was different. It was so cold that Shiro could feel as if her entire body was being frozen from the inside out. Surprisingly, she could even see a layer of ice being formed over her body. Her breaths were becoming sharper as her vision was blurring. Glancing around, she could faintly see that the entire chamber had become an ice cave. Thankfully, Ian was safe. She suddenly felt a sharp pain in her brain and passed out. ####. It was unsure how long it had been, but when Shiro opened her eyes again, the blizzard had long died down. Not only that, there was also not a single thing in the chamber that wasn't frozen, except for Ian, of course. Glancing at her rewards for the 4th star up, Shiro wasn't too surprised about the bonuses. Snow Girl, 300 free points per level up, 2% increased in ice elemental attack effectiveness and efficiency. Skill gained, Cold Illusions. Cold Illusions. Activate while in a cold environment. The skill will cast an illusion on your enemies and confuse them during the fight. Effectiveness and duration depends on the difference in strength. Cost, 1,000 MP per activation. Duration, not applicable. Cooldown, 5 minutes when the illusion is broken. With this star up, it only left her 5th and final star up before she could attempt her 2nd class up. However, now that her 2nd class upgrade was just around the corner, Shiro couldn't help but grow worried due to the fact that the 2nd class would no doubt need her to increase one of her attunements to Tier 3. Just upgrading her ice attunement to Tier 2 caused such a strong backlash. She knew that she definitely wouldn't be able to upgrade to Tier 3 before she healed her mana links. Glancing at Ian, who was somehow able to sleep in this situation, Shiro sat down and closed her eyes. She wanted to inspect her mana realm and see if there were any improvements. The reason as to why she hadn't entered before now was due to the fact that one could only upgrade their elemental islands once in a while. Paired with her broken mana links, Shiro needed to wait longer than usual before she could re-enter her mana realm to upgrade her islands. After a short moment, Shiro found herself back in her chaotic mana realm. Looking at the links that were still broken and mashed up, Shiro couldn't help but want to cry. If you're going to reincarnate me, at least give me a working body. Sighing at her current dilemma, she looked towards her elemental islands. Right now, the Lightning Island had a few mountains with thunderclouds in the sky, and the Shadow Islands as well, completely covered in shadows. The only one left was her Metal Island. Since the other islands were already at Tier 1, she may as well upgrade the Metal Island so that it wasn't left behind. Floating over to the island, Shiro landed with a soft thud. Glancing at the silver strands of mana that were floating around, she narrowed her eyes and raised her hands up. Mana gathered towards her palm as Shiro could already feel a bit of pain creeping up on her. However, this was unlike when she upgraded her Ice Island. The pain wasn't as intense and the difficulty was easier as well. After gathering her mana for a short moment, Shiro slammed her palm into the ground. Asterisk kish 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 kish. Metal started to erupt out of the ground as it started to convert the island into a metal island. Once the entire island was converted, Shiro saw that her metal attunement had successfully been upgraded to Tier 1. She smiled softly and exited the mana realm. Once she returned to her body, she felt a bit of blood leak out between her lips as just upgrading to Tier 1 still incurred a little bit of backlash. Well, that's sorted. Shiro sighed out as she stood up. She glanced briefly at her stats and noted that not much had changed except that a new skill was under the Snow Girl tab, and her humans killed increased from 7 to 9. The next thing she wanted to check was her appearance. Every star up brought her changes to her appearance. Conjuring up an ice mirror, Shiro glanced at her appearance and sighed at the fact that it seemed like her height had not changed at all. However, as her eyes drifted downwards, she widened them in surprise. "I got tits," she called out in shock. While the growth wasn't huge, what used to be called a runway had now evolved into 2 speed bumps. Good start. Shiro couldn't suppress the smile that crept up on her face. Finally, she was showing signs of growth on the physical side. Walking with a slight skip in her steps, she scooped Een towards her chest. Fufufu, little Een. Guess what? This lady is finally growing. Shiro laughed as her body had been plaguing her mind for so long. Watching her friend, Madison, suddenly grow out a pair of melons while she was still in the body that could best be described as jailbait wasn't the most pleasant feeling. She would have been happy for even a little bit of growth in her breast department, but it seemed like all of her nutrients went into her height during the previous star-ups. However, the runway Shiro is long gone and instead, Speed Bump Shiro had joined the fight. Walking out of the dungeon, her delighted mood seemed to roll off of her as it was causing the people around her to feel their moods lift up as well. A few unsavory fellows had something else lift up, but Shiro wasn't about to let that destroy her mood of finally growing more on the physical side. Walking back towards the campsite, she was going to try to get back before Kene woke up, or else she may have to sit through a mini lecture about not going to the city since it was dangerous. Arriving back at the camp, she wasn't ambushed by any people. However, she was surprised that Lyrica was back so soon. Looking at Lyrica, who was sitting in the shade of a tree, Shiro walked over. "You finished already?" Shiro asked. "Yeah, I was eliminated quickly." Lyrica forced a slight smile. "What happened?" "Well, after I entered the trial realm for the Nirvana Soul Blades, I was bombarded from all sides by attacks and I had no weapons. I wasn't even allowed to use my skills and all I had were these 4 swords. Unfortunately, they were barely responding to my mana, so I wasn't able to control them to help me. I only have 2 hands and with the blades being uncooperative, I wasn't able to survive for long and immediately got transferred out of the realm." Lyrica explained as Shiro thought about it and nodded. That did make sense since the trial for a set of purple plus grade equipment weren't going to be easy. "Amen? Shiro, did your breasts grow a little?" Lyrica asked, seeing the slight change to Shiro's body shape. "You noticed? I just started up, so there were a few changes to my body." Shiro replied, feeling a little bit of happiness well up inside her once again. However, as soon as she typed that, she realized that she was being a little too open with her emotions. Asterisk him. Coughing slightly, Shiro reined in her happiness and reverted herself back to the more composed side of her. "Yeah, my star-up changed my body again. It seems like this time the target was my breasts. Shiro retyped and showed it to Lyrica. Heh, is that so? Then you don't think that after you class up, you'll gain an adult body like Maddie, would you? Shiro thought for a moment and agreed at the fact that it could very likely be the case. After all, once she classes up, she would be classified as a C-ranked monster. The closer she got to B rank, the more adult-like she'd become on the physical side, because at B rank, she'd become a snow woman. Of course, that's only if she doesn't deviate from her evolution path. However, from what she understood, after choosing to become a snow woman, it would be very hard to evolve into anything after that. Even in her past life, there were few mentions of the roles after Snow Woman. Therefore, it was definitely in her best interest to stray from her evolution path so that she could reach the apex once more. Well, I hope so. But I think it will take me a while to enter C rank, since I need to obtain some medicine that will hopefully cure one of my internal injuries. Otherwise, I can give up thinking about classing up. Shiro shrugged with a soft smile. You have internal injuries? Lyrica asked, surprised. Wait, could it be what's causing you to struggle with upholding your spells for a long time? She asked with a frown. You noticed? Shiro was slightly surprised. Well, of course. I always I always check up on how the party is during a fight. And I've noticed that you become paler the more you use your magic in a fight. Lyrica replied whilst correcting herself mid-sentence. And from what I know, there are only few cases where mages would struggle with spells. Either A, you're low on mana. B, you don't have the capabilities to use the spell, or C, damage mana links. Clearly A and B are wrong, since you could easily cast those spells, so that only leaves C. You've damaged your mana links, haven't you? Lyrica analyzed whilst furrowing her brows. Shiro was pleasantly surprised at how Lyrica knew, but only smiled. I wish they were just damaged instead of broken. That'll make things easier. Yeah, I've already got someone to order me a pill that'll help my mana links, so you don't have to worry. Shiro smiled. Well, if it doesn't work, we can always look for more ways to heal your mana links. I heard that as long as your mana links aren't broken, it's not a lost cause. But this Missy's mana links are broken. That's the lost cause you're talking about. Yeah, well, since you failed the Nirvana Soul Blade trials, I'm going to give it a go. Shiro replied and stood up. If she also failed it, she would then convert the blades into some normal defensive equipment for Lyrica. Lyrica nodded and handed over the blades. Would you like to enter the trial realm for the Nirvana Soul Blades? Y/N. Looking at the notification, Shiro gave Lyrica a light wave before pressing yes. Feeling her vision shift, she instantly felt killing intent attack her from all sides. Starting already, huh? Shiro grinned and grabbed 2 of the Nirvana Soul Blades with her hands. Dang dang. Deflecting the attacks that attacked her, Shiro inserted mana to the other 2 blades and frowned. No wonder Lyrica couldn't control these. They require a specific energy path to be activated. Seems like the first trial was to figure out the energy path whilst simultaneously fending off the incoming attacks. Dang dang. Deflecting a few more attacks, Shiro flipped her body backwards as she retreated for a short moment. While she was doing this, she was also splitting her attention and probing the other 2 blades that hung on her waist, slowly figuring out their energy path. Previously, the moment she entered this trial realm, she had already tried to use her magic and passive abilities, but to no avail. That led her to understand that in this realm, she could only use the blades in her hands. Naturally, her grin slowly faded since she knew that she should get serious. The only times where she was serious and weren't distracted were rare. Except for a few situations after her reincarnation, she was essentially having a fun stroll whilst enjoying the feeling of growth. Breathing out steadily, her eyes snapped open and were completely void of any emotions. Shifting her body to narrowly avoid a few strikes, whilst swinging her sword to deflect the strikes she couldn't dodge, Shiro essentially created a small domain around her that couldn't be penetrated no matter how hard and how fast the strikes were. This was her benefit of being able to grasp 100% of her body movements. While it wasn't currently at 100%, it was certainly hovering around the 80% mark. During this entire time of her reincarnation, She spent every second familiarizing herself with her body, walking, resting, parkouring, and fighting. The reach of her attacks, the range of flexibility, and the limit of her body strength. With her mind completely focused on defense and mapping out the energy path of the blades, she was akin to a war goddess that had no flaws in her defenses. As she continued to defend herself, she also made progress with the remaining two blades. The moment her mind had fully mapped the blades, she flooded both blades with her mana. Asterisk bang. Slashing away all of the attacks that were aimed towards her, Shiro now had 4 swords hovering around her that were being controlled with a wave of her fingers. Asterisk dang 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 dang. The sword's ring of action created an orb of absolute defense around her. Glancing at the current defense of the other 3 blades that were coordinating with the sword that she was controlling, Shiro couldn't help but applause at the power behind the Nirvana soul blades. Her seriousness was replaced by her usual relaxed demeanor as she glanced at where she was meant to go. Seems like I'm meant to go towards the giant gate ahead, she thought when she saw the faint outline of a golden gate into the distance. With her target set, Shiro flicked her wrist as one of the swords floated in front of her. Hopping onto the sword, Shiro flew towards the gate while the other 3 blades would defend her. After a short moment of travel, the gate outline became clearer. However, she was also forced to land back on the ground due to the intensity of the attacks that were striking towards her. Previously, even though she wasn't too familiar with the blades, she could still handle the attacks. But she discovered that the closer she got to the gate, the more intense these attacks became. Controlling the blades to defend her, Shiro narrowed her eyes when she saw her advancement speed slow down dramatically. She could only take a step forward every few seconds since the moment she did. A small gap would open up in her defenses and the attacks would aim for that gap. This forced her to try to mend her gaps the moment she finished her steps, which in turn would decrease her progression speed. Furrowing her brows, Shiro glanced at the swords and started to memorize their movement patterns. Standing in place for a short moment, she was able to understand their unique pattern of movement. Even though it was still chaotic, there were times of order. That was due to the fact that if everything was chaotic, everything would be randomized. Forget keeping her safe, the blades wouldn't even be able to correctly hit the attacks if they were truly random. However, it was also when it flipped its switch to order, the blades would become predictable. Hence why gaps would appear the moment she took a step. The only way to fix this would be to find the perfect balance between chaos and order. Chaos brought unpredictability in both attack and defense. But order, on the other hand, brought predictability and consistency. Chaos is best suited for attacks, but order is too predictable for defense. Shiro sighed. There was also the option of using defensive sword arts with the Nirvana soul blades to defend herself, but she had never learned any defensive sword art. Narrowing her eyes, Shiro swept her gaze towards the swords that were currently busy protecting her. What if I tried to pair it up with my own style phantom arts? Perhaps if I try to recreate what each of the phantoms did, I'll have a better chance. Shiro muttered and started to experiment whilst being bombarded by the attacks. The best way to develop a technique was through combat, and this was the perfect moment to develop a sword art to be stored in her arsenal. ####. She wasn't sure about how long it had been, but things started to gradually get easier for her. Unfortunately, she still wasn't able to create a sword technique. Heis, it's not like I'm an avid sword user in the first place. It'll be stranger if I did come up with a technique. Shiro shrugged her shoulders. However, her control over the Nirvana soul blades had become much more refined when compared to the first time she used the blades. Flicking her wrist, the swords orbited around her like satellites. She made sure that they were working on 2 separate layers with 3 on the outside and 1 on the inside that would cover for any gaps that would appear. While this made it easier for the attacks to slip through the first layer, they were stopped easily on the second layer. But in order for Shiro to do this, she had to simultaneously control 2 of the swords. Since the pressure of the attacks had been reduced by a rather significant amount, Shiro walked towards the gates once more, but this time with more success. Like before, the closer she got, the more attacks would be shot towards her. However, with her 2 layered defenses, it was still a breeze for her. Nirvana Trial Blades. Stage 1 complete. Seeing the notification, Shiro was suddenly overwhelmed by the feeling of falling. Looking down, she saw that a hole had opened up beneath her and that she was currently falling towards a small light in the distance. I guess that's where stage 2 is going to be held, she thought to herself as she controlled the blades to help her increase her falling speed. It didn't take long for her to arrive at the second stage. Slowing down her speed, Shiro landed softly on the floor and looked around. The room she was currently in had the feeling of being a tomb of sorts. There were empty graves and weapons lying around. Further down in the room, there were 10 graves that had not been touched just yet. Oddly enough, Shiro could instinctively feel what this stage wanted her to do. Furrowing her brows, Shiro decided to go along with the feeling and walked towards the coffin furthest away from her. Looking at the gold-plated coffin, Shiro placed her hand on the surface and closed her eyes. A set of seals started to spread out from her palms as the Nirvana soul blades started to experience a change. Their shapes were melted down before shifting around in an attempt to recast itself. Naturally, Shiro was unaware of this as she was sent into a spiritual realm of sorts where she was in a phantom form. Looking around, all she saw was a boundless plain of white before she suddenly felt pain in her body. It was a familiar pain too when she would overexert her mana links. Gritting her teeth, she suddenly saw 4 orbs of light surround her. Dark purple, neon yellow, sky blue, and silver. She could sense that they were elements, but wasn't sure as to why they would appear in front of her. Her thoughts were broken when she saw the system notification. Compatibility evaluated, 91%. Stage 2 passed. Nirvana Soul Blades unlocked and bound to Shiro. Nirvana Soul Blades, purple plus, dash, Ascendant Dream, orange.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe.